Welcome to Szabo Cast. Here we discuss all things from a working class, trans, anarchist, analytical perspective. Due to the nature of this show, listener discretion is advised. My name is Skylar, my pronouns are she, they, they, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today.
Welcome to Season 2 of Szabo Cast. I'm going to give an additional content warning because this is not only going to be a long episode, it is the longest episode I've done on the podcast so far, so we're starting Season 2 right off with a bang. And keep in mind that this is an info dump episode, so there's just piles and piles of information that's just going to be dumped right on top of you. So maybe listen to this episode in parts. Feel free to just watch this at your own pace. Come back to this at a later time. No big deal if you can't sit through it all at once. That's valid. And lastly, this episode deals with the topic of Christian nationalism, Christian fascism, and a very, very deep rabbit hole into what is Project 2025. I really don't want to understate just how much information there is in this episode, so definitely do come back at a later time if you do step away for a bit. Anyway, tell me, can you imagine the end of the world? I bet, unfortunately, that, yeah, some of you definitely have before. Well, we're going to be talking about a bunch of people who really do. And I mean really do. We're going to be talking about the Christian identity today, which is a really interesting piece of fascist propaganda. In our modern time, I can't think of anything more violent, more bloodthirsty, and more absolutely batshit than Christian identity. You think about like older fascist movements, from Latin American dictatorships to Eastern European fascist movements like the Nazis, the Brown Shirts, the Phalangist movement, from Oswald Mosley to Milo Yiannopoulos, from the Brown Shirts of Italy to the Blood Tribe in the United States. There is nothing more lethal in a time like this than Christian identity. Now, am I generalizing all Christians here? Absolutely not. But to those who I am not referring to, listen the fuck up because I have a lot to fucking say. The first really big thing I'm gonna say is that the far right movement that is identifying with Christianity is representing you too. What this means is that when you're telling people that, oh, Donald Trump doesn't represent Christians, which, fair, that's a good point, you still need to remember that Donald Trump is speaking on your behalf. And my friend, if you don't want that, you need to take matters into your own hands. You need to realize that getting involved with mutual aid and direct action and community organizing is not only going to help the community, of course, but much more importantly, it's going to redefine Christianity. Because right now, and I'm just speaking from vibes here, not really from statistics or anything, but people are kind of like put off by Christianity. Like, myself included, in fact. When I hear somebody talk about Christianity, the last thing I think about is Jesus Christ getting involved in mutual aid and direct action, which is quite ironic because that is something that people know Jesus Christ for. They know Jesus Christ for standing up for the vulnerable, standing up for the poor, teaching people to love thy neighbor, doing all kinds of practices like mutual aid and direct action, like feeding the poor, flipping the tables of the moneylenders. And one thing I always hear Christians say is that Jesus was crucified because he died for your sins. Well, no. Jesus died for his own sins, as anarcho-punk band Crass would say. But here's the thing about that I want to put my own spin on. There are two ways to go about that analysis. When we talk about the sin that Jesus caused, we have to think about the right wing and how the right wing portrays Jesus. The long-haired hippie white dude who is all-powerful, all-wise, he's secretly his own daddy, as well as the rest of the Holy Trinity. And if you're dumb enough to join some of the crazier parts of far-right Christianity, you believe that it is your mission, ordained by God himself, to accelerate the end of the fucking world. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I mean by Christian identity. It's far more dangerous than any other fascist movement that I've ever fucking heard of, and it is contemporary and it is very fucking real. Calling this a cult would be an understatement. I would dare argue that this shit is a conglomeration of cults. Now, cults can vary, but in particular, a cult needs a strong leader. And I mentioned how it is a conglomeration of cults. But one thing I think people forget is how God is used as a weapon to control the masses within the Christian movement. You see, the Christian movement is a wildly supremacist-ass movement. It doesn't just have one leader, it has multiple leaders. Some Christians will say that Trump isn't a real Christian because of his actions, or because Trump just honestly doesn't really believe in the Bible, hasn't read the Bible, hasn't practiced Christianity in any way. Except for like the times that he did so performatively, like hold a Bible upside down after riot cops cleared an entire protest group by the White House. This event took place in 2020 during the George Floyd protests that were going on in the United States. And contrast that with how Capitol riot police were responding to Christian nationalists storming the Capitol on January 6, 2021, which includes, but of course not limited to, neo-Nazis, neo-fascists, neo-Confederates, Q-birds or QAnon followers. With this bunch of people even erecting an actual crucifix that is like 3 or 4 times the size of a human being. The thing is that Christianity is used as a weapon. It's a vehicle for controlling the masses. God is used in a lot of rhetorical talking points by predominant leaders through our time because they're trying to perceive through others that they are legitimate in their place in authority. And so every single time you hear about God or Jesus or pretty much any religion from somebody in a position of political power, you start to get theocracies, or you start to get policies that favor theocratic fascism. You need to remember that the cross is a symbol of torture, right? That is the fundamental symbol of the whole damn religion. If you read the manga, the lore is that Jesus died on the cross. He was executed by the Roman Empire. This means the Christian identity movement is ideologically in line with the Roman Empire. And so the canon here is that these crazy fucking extremists are trying to enact their lore into the reality by making it the end of the world. And I am not kidding when I say they are trying to cause the end of the world. Okay, I want to make that extremely clear. You will see throughout this episode that the Christian identity movement is extremely supremacist, and its goal is to literally accelerate the end of the world. It acknowledges climate change, but it wants to accelerate climate change. I'm not fucking kidding. You're gonna see that in this episode. And it comes full circle. We now understand that Jesus is a vehicle for far-right fascist nutjobs who have a whole lot of money. Way too damn much, in fact. Why are they not paying taxes? It must have something to do with every time the Republicans get elected, there are tax breaks for the rich and screwing over the poor. This is an entire political wing of the United States that is in lockstep with the far-right Christian identity movement. Meanwhile, there is a Christian left, and I want to talk about them for a little bit because I feel like we don't really hear from them enough. But at the same time, I feel like there is a failing with the Christian left, and I really want to highlight that in particular as well. So as an anarchist, I am a former Christian, more particularly a former Catholic. And my goal in life is to see the complete abolition of not only the Catholic Church, but just churches in general. Now we need to talk about what a church is, because I feel like a lot of people misunderstand what the role of a church is in a community. What the role of the church does in your community, it does bring people together, but it brings certain people together. It brings specific denominations of people together, from Catholics to Baptists to Mormon to Methodist, etc., so on and so forth. The problem is that they don't even get along with themselves, and this isn't new. This is something that has existed throughout the entire history, all the way to its inception of Christianity. You see, Christianity is a troubled religion because every time a Christian movement begins to grow, other Christians with more money and influence and political standing tend to participate in a variety of feudalism, imperialism, capitalism, colonialism. When it comes to the text of the Lord, Jesus highly contradicts the entirety of Christian history. The Diggers movement, which is another earlier Christian society, was against land property ownership, and they believed that everybody was entitled to land, but it was the Christian institution that killed them off. The Cathars were a safe haven for marginalized people to go to, and the Christian institution killed them off. Kind of like how fascism is a cannibalistic ideology, Christians tend to be victims of their own supremacist institutions. And the movement only grows and grows and grows until it is its own successful supremacist movement. But that's just a whole revolutionary movement that is doomed to go extinct, because it is so hell-bent on genocide and extermination. On principle alone, how Christianity exists today is extremely contradictory to its own mission statement and to its own lore. Genocide, extermination, censorship, burning people, and keep in mind, this is all for variously different reasons, but it tends to falter into the lines of that it threatens God. Keep in mind that this is God that is supposed to be all-powerful, almighty, omnipotent, all-present, able to literally command your very will. I mean, I guess, they'll say free will, but honestly, this is the same religion that says the Dad is the Son and the Holy Spirit. So it's But now here's where things get interesting. There is a wave recently of people trying to redefine and reclaim Christianity. And this is not my first time acknowledging them on my podcast or my videos. More specifically, I've done a video that acknowledged this liberatory theology that is really bumping up recently. I don't want to get too deep into it, but the video I was actually talking about them in was a movie review of a literal Catholic fascist film that was produced by Warner Brothers in 1952. And I don't know, dog, but I don't think that's a film that you should be showing children, despite it actually involving children and it being shown in Sunday school. I go into way more detail on that film in my other channel, Turbo Queer, but right now I want to really focus on libertarian theology, because at the end I started to acknowledge certain figures like John Brown, who was an abolitionist who took matters into his own hands, and I actually quite deeply respect John Brown as a historical figure for that reason, because he was an abolitionist who even got the praise of Frederick Douglass himself. And he even got some help from Harriet Tubman. But every time I start glazing up John Brown, there's something that I tend to do, and that is I stop and I think about what I'm saying, right? And that is, why aren't there people like John Brown today? Let's really talk about the practicality of, say, a modern time John Brown, which I'm sure they do exist, but maybe they're buried under obscurity, and you could probably link to some modern day John Browns. I do know that there is the John Brown Gun Club. I deeply respect what they're doing, especially Elm Fork John Brown Gun Club. They are really fucking cool. Also want to give a huge shout out to Willem von Spronson. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Rest in power, Willem von Spronson. But here's the thing, they're not a specifically Christian coalition, which they shouldn't be. They shouldn't just be a Christian coalition, but I'm sure that they allow space for Christians to, organize with them. That's awesome. However, if we are to even assume that the entire John Brown Gun Club itself was a Christian coalition of radical Christians who really want to just do good for the community and put their lives on the line, which again, I deeply respect, then the issue is that they are the only ones doing it in this scenario. You see, I talk a lot about Christian Zionism when I talk about Israel, because a lot of the times people do forget that there is an anti-Zionist Jewish movement. In fact, it's quite popular. Obviously, it's not all Jews, and you also got to keep in mind that Jewish people are not a monolith. They live all over the world. They live across all class boundaries, and they live with all kinds of ethnic backgrounds. But at the same time, my friends, I see Jews fighting back against Israel's imperialism. It's all over the world. It's in the United States. It's in England. It's in Europe in general. It's in Israel too. Jewish people have historically fought back against oppression. They even got the golem folklore behind that. And this is going to be a hot take, but you got to keep in mind that Jesus lived his life as a Jew. Christianity didn't become a thing until years later, where word of mouth passed on from generation to generation. And keep in mind, of course, that these are the early Christian movements, but at some point, like Augustine, was when they started to utilize hierarchy and making Christianity, and by extension Catholicism, the main state religion of the Roman Empire. So my hot take here is the reason why Jesus was so fucking cool is because he was a Jew. He lived his life as a Jew. His Jewish faith led him to live the life and perform the actions that he did, and to die on the cross because, and this is critically important, the Roman Empire punished him for sedition. Jesus Christ was killed by the state. This is what I think Christian anarchists, Christian socialists, and Christian communists believe in the story of Jesus. This is what I think they believe. I am an anarchist and a communist, but I am not a Christian. So, what the fuck, right? Well, you see, I used to be one for a whole third of my life, meaning the first decade and plus 1 year of my life being a Christian. And of course, I wasn't fully cognizant, because a good portion of that was me being a baby and learning my first words and stuff like that. Of course, the indoctrination didn't come, and well, actually, no, I was baptized, so never mind, scratch that. I don't fault my family necessarily. I think they were just doing what they thought was the right thing to do, but I think moving forward, this is a huge lesson that you don't force religion onto your kids, because if your kid can't question authority, then how are they going to be capable of independent thought in any way? How is the American dream, which is supposed to be built on the delusion of freedom, liberty, and justice for all, how are people who can't question authority or question the infallible weapon of God, how are they going to be able to call themselves free and autonomous? They just can't, because they won't have the tools to be able to question authority. So to Christian anarchists and to Christian communists and to Christian socialists, you understand that you are a contradiction, in the very sense of the word. You are as much of a contradiction as say Nazbul or anarcho-capitalism. That's what kind of contradiction you are. Now, you don't have to hate yourself for this or anything. I want to make that very clear. You can still be a Christian and internalize the messages that Jesus taught you, especially in specifically the liberatory version of Jesus Christ. But you also have to realize, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, the far right
extremist, neo-fascist Christian identity movements, these movements right here, they are speaking for you. And they are speaking loudly, so loudly that they are finally beginning to feel emboldened in making choices that blatantly violate people's basic human rights. They're going after the government, like the Heritage Foundation, who has a 900-page document talking about how they're going to strip the government piece by piece. Every single limb, every single branch of the government is going to be weaker in its political power, and it's not going to be able to put a checks and balances system, meaningfully at least, and hold the executive branch accountable. We're at a threshold now where that is a very possible future. As much as I obviously don't want that to be our future, that is a very potentially near future. And we should be scared, because these people in particular are fucking psycho. I mean, absolutely fucking psycho. You heard the way I described the Christian fascist movement throughout the past 17-ish minutes, and it has been crazy. And I've used a lot of very colorful language when I describe these people. And I'm gonna tell you right now that these motherfucking people, they are goddamn nuts, especially in what I'm about to present to you. I present to you Project 2025. You might have heard about Project 2025 in the news recently, and that is because it is a 900-page document with the goal of dismantling all of the branches of the U.S. government and giving the executive branch, being where the U.S. president would be, more executive power. Whenever we criticize the government, there is always this narrative that the government is going to perform some kind of checks and balances system, and Project 2025 is seeking to completely tarnish the system in which holds each of the branches accountable within the U.S. government. You see, what this is supposed to do is that it's supposed to outline the first 180 days of any conservative presidency. Ideally, in this case, it would be Donald Trump. There are some things to consider in this case. For one, Donald Trump is trying to distance himself on a public relations level from Project 2025 due to the traction it has gotten within the media and, people being outraged by the fact that this is a complete subversion of democracy as we know it, because it admittedly doesn't make Trump look good. And I mean, he doesn't look good anyway, but he's got his cult followers, and I'm digressing by a large margin. But as we go over Project 2025, we're going to learn that it runs pretty deep, and that there are connections with Project 2025 and the movement that backs Project 2025, all in cahoots with Donald Trump himself. So make no mistake, just because Donald Trump criticizes or distances himself from Project 2025, it does not mean that he has no relation to it. It does not mean that he won't be the benefactor of Project 2025. It does not mean that he won't be using Project 2025 as a playbook for his potential return. And of course, we don't want that. So Project 2025 has essentially a lot of policies that it is proposing and that it is planning to enact within its first 180 days in office. And this includes, but of course, very much not limited to, bans on trans people's existence, abortion bans, gutting social programs for the poor, and tax breaks for the rich, mass deportation of immigrants, and concentration camps for opposition to Project 2025 and the conservative presidency. One of the examples of Donald Trump flirting with the idea of using this playbook for his agenda is when he was on Sean Hannity's Fox News show, and according to USA Today, he said he would be a dictator only on day one, and proceeded to say to Sean Hannity, quote, "After that, I'm not a dictator, okay?" End quote. Before anyone comments about this, I don't vibe with the whole, oh, he was being ironic, he was joking, it was a meme. No, I don't buy that. I think if you say something like, oh, I'm a fascist, or I'm a dictator, or I'm gonna enact
authoritarianism, even in a joking way, you should be taken seriously, and you should be deemed as a threat. Like when Matt Walsh, for example, who is a talk show host with the Daily Wire, calls himself a theocratic fascist, and then people respond by saying, oh, no, he's joking. He's not really a theocratic fascist. No, first of all, his words and his actions and his espoused beliefs reflect theocratic fascism, characteristically speaking. And secondly, even if he is joking, fuck no. I'm an anarchist. I am not joking. I am not being ironic. I can own my words. If a filthy little worm like Matt Walsh is going to refer to him, even jokingly, as a theocratic fascist, I'm gonna fucking believe 100% that he is a theocratic fascist. And the same goes for Trump, who is interested in enacting a dictatorship. I take that seriously. If you're gonna say words that are serious like this, and you're gonna backtrack and say, oh, I'm just kidding, then I really don't think that you are confident in the words that you are speaking in the first place. I don't believe that you are confident in your own world beliefs in the first place. I can say with my full chest, without hiding it, I'm an anarcho-communist. I'm proud of it. I've been an anarcho-communist my entire adult life. And I find it abhorrently offensive that sometimes people will just say, oh, I'm a neo-Nazi, or I'm a neo-fascist, or I believe in a Christian fascist future. And then they backtrack and say, oh, I'm just kidding, or I'm just gonna do that, like, ironically or whatever. I find that to be a layer of cowardice that really is so shameful that there is no redeeming of that person's character whatsoever. And I think Donald Trump, just in this exact moment alone, demonstrated this. Because you have to really consider, it's not only an insult to my intelligence and to your intelligence, but it is an insult to the intelligence of his followers. And I know that it's a little silly to refer to his followers as intelligent, but you know what I mean. These people have been duped into being his followers. And you know that these particular people, the MAGA followers, are willing to pay lip service for the defensive, argumentative talking point that Donald Trump is just being ironic and memeing. No. When somebody says to you that they are a fascist, you take them seriously, and you take them literally. Because later in this episode, you're gonna see some people who will call themselves fascists, and they are deeply tied into all of this, and they're not joking. They're not being ironic. They're not memeing on all of us. They're being dead fucking serious. Anyway, there is something to point out here, and that is, while Donald Trump is, for all intents and purposes, the face of Project 2025 within the context of the US presidential election, the whole Christian fascist and Christian identity movement is not holistically centered around Donald Trump being the holistic leader of the country. No. You see, the thing is about Project 2025 is that it is a framework for any conservative who wins the presidential seat. So say, for example, conservative House of Representatives Speaker Mike Johnson, if he happened to somehow magically win this election, Project 2025 would land on his lap on day one. And Michael Johnson is not better than Trump, by the way. You're actually going to find later on that he's pretty tied to all of this too. We're going to take an important side tangent to talk about an organization that is called Ziklag. Z-I-K-L-A-G. The name Ziklag, I'm just going to be honest with you, sounds like a weird slur. Like if I were to call some kind of Christian fascist a slur, I'd be like, you fucking Ziklag! Get away from me, you fucking disgusting Ziklag! In all seriousness, Ziklag is in the Bible, surprisingly enough, and it's in reference to a particular town that was near the kingdom of Judah, which was gifted to David when he and his soldiers were at war with King Saul. And what's absolutely fascinating about this is that you can actually tie this story into, metaphorically speaking, their mission statement, rather their 30-year vision that Ziklag has laid out for us. Quote, "We are in a spiritual battle and locked in a terrible conflict with the powers of darkness. Redirect the trajectory of American culture towards Christ by bringing back biblical structure, order, and truth to our nation." End quote. And that's their interpretation of the Bible story, not mine. I want to make that very clear. That is how they're using that name. This is not even close to removed to a politician saying, "We are a Christian nation." This isn't just a lobbying group, this is a fucking cult. Its exact location is unknown, but it was supposed to be in the Negev desert somewhere. That's where it is said to be, but we don't know that for sure. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an organization that is a registered 501c3 of wealthy Christians that aim to establish theocracy through election interference and blatant and arduous anti-transgender propaganda. Ziklag utilizes something called Eagle AI, which is an artificial intelligence tool that says it is challenging and scrutinizing the electoral process in the United States, but it's just an election interference tool. Keep all of this in mind for later. Trans people in this context are the scapegoat of this fascist group, and Ziklag has a close relation with the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is an organization of extremist lawyers who want to make it so it is considered illegal to be homosexual, putting the LGBTQ community on sex offender registry lists. They blatantly want to criminalize the LGBTQ community and our existence as a whole. So Ziklag has been working with the Alliance Defending Freedom since 2021, and their alliance has a deep solidarity with homophobia, queerphobia, and transphobia, but their ultimate goal here is to completely gut the education system as it exists today. And to be clear, we're talking about the public education system and in favor of private education. Private meaning Christian religious schools with tax write-offs and shit. Now, public education in the United States does in fact have a lot of flaws within it. Like, one example is that it has been referred to as a school-to-prison pipeline because school does not really prepare you for success as an adult. It rather pushes you down into a working class society that is quicker to throw you in jail than it is to grant you the tools and means to be able to get some kind of upward mobility. I'm only mentioning this because there is some nuance to be had when talking about the American education system, but this is not what they're seeking to address here. They're seeking to address a fully theocratic education system that is funded by the religious right for the religious right. Now, Ziklag has three main pillars for its overall agenda and strategy. The first part of that pillar is called steeplechase, which is the promotion of voting at churches, keeping the electoral process strictly in the hands of religious church institutions to blur the lines between church and state. The second is Watchtower, and Watchtower refers to parental rights. This can range from libs of TikTok and Chaya Raychik, all the way from the extremist pedophiles that work alongside with Sanjay Shah, who keeps showing up to the Glendale School District building and causing fights and violence. These people want to strictly define an ownership of children. And keep in mind that while some of these people who work alongside with this pillar are in fact parents, a lot of them are not. And a lot of them just show up to school board meetings having no children of their own, let alone enrolled into the school board district in the first place. This happens so often that watch groups that are actually regulating these particular parents' rights group end up finding those childless people on sex offender registry lists. A great example of this is Christian Ziegler and Bridget Ziegler, who are very influential people in Moms for Liberty, the Florida Republican Party, and the Sarasota County School Board. Christian Ziegler, who is Bridget Ziegler's wife, has been accused of rape. This is a couple of people who use their position and political power in multiple aspects of the Florida government, saying that trans people are groomers and that trans people are going after your kids. But these people are literally living a double standard here. That is because it has nothing to do with protecting the children, and it has everything to do with control, which is the purpose of the pillar of Watchtower in Ziklag. And the final pillar of all of this is called Checkmate, which is the continuous criticism of the U.S. electoral system, such as the narrative of stopping the steal and claiming that Donald Trump actually won the 2020 election. These are crackjob conspiracy theories, but it's an attempt to overthrow the electoral process, as we mentioned with Eagle AI earlier, which is meant to interfere with the election. So you'll see later on, this has nothing to do with the integrity of the electoral process, but everything to do with hijacking it and making it work for them. So after all I just explained to you, I know it's a lot of information, and I'm gonna be dumping a lot more information on you in a second. But if you thought that was bad, they adhere to a theory that is in every way what the far-right conspiracy theories would consider to be like a cabal. And of course, I just want to make it clear, I don't endorse the use of this framing because of its anti-Semitic connotations. I don't want to start calling Christians a cabal because that is what they do to the Jewish community, and that only just perpetuates harm. But this is to say that when anti-Semites refer to a cabal to scapegoat the Jewish diaspora, that particular conspiracy theory is pure projection coming from the Christian identity movement, and this next part that we're going to dive into is a fine example of exactly that. We're going to talk about an ideology that is called the Seven Mountains Mandate. This refers to what Christians deem to be as the 7 pillars that control society. And we're about to go into more pillars here. So the first pillar would be family, which is creating a gender ideology, so to speak, that takes form of the nuclear family and mythologizing the role of the family through theological patriarchy. So pretty much taking the nuclear family model that men are the top dog of the house, and that women are to be subservient, and that children are to be seen and not heard. They want to make that into law, basically. The next pillar is religion, which is utilizing religion as a weapon of control to manipulate the masses on an emotional and spiritual level in order to permanently fossilize their dominance. For the sake of brevity, we're going to put a pin on the religion pillar of the Seven Mountains Mandate for later, because I have a lot to say about that. Because the next pillar is education, and of course the goal for that would be to gut the education system to prevent people from questioning authority and researching on the leaders of the theocratic rule. I want to make a quick point that if you want like a dead giveaway as to whether or not a particular movement or organization or individual is a fascist one, you can always tell by how badly they want to gut the education system. Because if they want the population of people to be uneducated, then that means that they don't want the population to question authority. They don't want the people to find out or read up on what's going on. The purpose of like gutting education funding or censoring books or censoring parts of education is to kind of keep people in line, obedient to you, so reactionary that they'll start defending you and your dominance because they don't know better and they don't have the tools to know better. The next pillar of the Seven Mountains Mandate would be media, maintaining a monopoly on the media to gain control of the narrative that is being fed to the people. The next pillar would be entertainment. We're going to put a pin on this as well because I have a lot more to say about this way later into the episode. But this is just yet again another pillar to accelerate any kind of Christian fascist propaganda that, like I said earlier, is meant to prevent people from questioning authority and think that the Christian fascist dominant rule is the natural order. The next pillar is business, which is, quite obvious considering that we live in a capitalist hellscape. Giving tax breaks to the rich and gutting the poor, destroying all sense of upward mobility. And the last pillar, which is quite obvious at this point, is government, is to solidify total dominance by any means necessary. Now, the Seven Mountains Mandate is an ideology, don't get it twisted here, but it is believed by many different organizations, and it's also believed by many alliances, conglomerations of organizations. Yeah, this is getting deeper. For example, the New Apostolic Reformation, which is an alliance of varying ideologies, which include the Seven Mountains Mandate, but also includes evangelicalism and Pentecostalism, with the sole purpose of pushing for a spiritual warfare, prepping Christians up for violence in the name of its leaders who call themselves prophets and apostles. This is where it begins to come full circle here, because a lot of these particular people within Ziklag, and even people within U.S. Congress, particularly believe in this spiritual warfare. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Mike Johnson, Lauren Boebert believe in this particular cosmic battle that they are fighting between good and evil. They believe they are fighting on the side of good and that everything that opposes them is evil. They get to define what evil is, by the way, whether it be immigrants trying to refuge to safety at the southern border, or people trying to get access to abortion, or the LGBTQ community just existing at all. They get to define what is evil, and the issue is that if this was just some fringe group of people that had crackerjackism conspiracy theories, this wouldn't be an issue. But the problem is that they have actual seats of political power to influence our lives. There are also some pundits and religious figures such as Charlie Kirk, Kenneth Copeland, Gene Bailey, and Paula White, who all are a part of this New Apostolic Reformation cult. So, for the next part of this podcast episode, we're going to be going over a lot of people. We're going to be giving character profiles to some of the people that we already mentioned, and we're actually going to be talking about a lot more people who have some kind of political influence or social power. I think the first we should go over is Gene Bailey.
So, a lot of what we've talked about is how, people like to say in the news team, everybody likes to say, we're fair and balanced. We've been unabashed about when we come out. It's why you hear me at the end of most programs say, when I get it right, that we're to the right of center. You won't find us in the center or in the middle. We do have an agenda, and that is, I am a Christo-fascist Christian nationalist, but I am sunny and well coiffed, according to Rolling Stone.
What you just heard was Gene Bailey refer to himself as a Christo-fascist. I mean, of course, he's referring to Christian fascism, and of course, he also mentioned that he is a Christian nationalist. But this is to say, again, as I said earlier, that when somebody refers to themselves as a fascist or a Nazi, you believe them, okay? Again, I have no reservations saying with my full chest that I'm an anarchist. And if somebody comes out and says that Gene Bailey is ironically calling himself a fascist, then that means that the people who were saying all of this hateful shit about the LGBT community, trying to restrict abortion rights, trying to gut the education system, censor books, censor the media, accelerate deportations, and create concentration camps, all of these people who are espousing this hateful bullshit, they're not even confident in their own beliefs. So yeah, believe them when they say they're a fascist, because that means they are telling you that they're a threat to the community. Anyway, so Gene Bailey is the senior executive pastor at Eagle Mountain International Church. And according to this church's website, this is a quote, "We believe in the resurrection of the dead, the eternal happiness of the saved and the eternal punishment of the lost. This is a blatant warning sign right here, saying that if you do not submit to our cult, you are gonna get fucked so hard by the government when Project 2025 is passed. This should be a fucking alarm bell to you all. On the same website, Gene Bailey himself says, and this is another quote specifically, quote, "I've traveled the world in ministry, and I've learned the best place to be is where God plants you." And within the next paragraph, he says, "I was born in Georgia, but a Texan by choice," end quote. That was the last sentence of a paragraph, and then the first sentence of the following paragraph. And he just contradicted himself. God planted him, in his mythology, in Georgia, but he chose to be a Texan. This is so fascinating to me, because this is one of those instances where it's rule for thee, but not for me. He wants people to believe that their circumstances in life, whether they have an unwanted pregnancy that they can't get an abortion from because Roe versus Wade has been repealed, and if you're like a trans child experiencing gender dysphoria, but there is no gender affirming care available to you because it's illegal in your state, he believes in those circumstances that you should stay in those circumstances because God planted you there. But for him, he gets to fucking move to Texas because he chooses to. Just like how abortion and gender affirming care are both life-altering decisions that are decisions that should be negotiated on between a doctor and the patient. In his own ideology, he believes he gets to have the luxury of making life-altering decisions. He believes he deserves to have a monopoly on human autonomy. Also, Eagle Mountain International Church, huh? That sounds familiar. Well, if that's your thought, then you are correct. It is familiar because the founder of Eagle Mountain International Church is none other than Kenneth Copeland himself. Yes, friends, we are going way off the fucking deep end here. You see, Kenneth Copeland also owns what is called the Victory Channel, and according to the website, quote, "The Victory Channel is a 24/7 Word of Faith teaching network. The most trusted ministers, the uncompromised word, complete immersion, day or night." So if you're up at like 2 in the morning and you're just thinking, wow, I can't be fascist enough. How can I be even more fascist? Well, the Victory Channel's got you covered. Now keep in mind that while this is your typical prosperity gospel televangelist bullshit, in 2022, Kenneth Copeland put what is called the Flashpoint, which is a program that is hosted by Gene Bailey, which is how Kenneth Copeland is involved in the picture. Kenneth Copeland essentially gave Gene Bailey the platform to propagate this Christian fascist bullshit. Now, Kenneth Copeland has ironically become kind of a meme on the internet, and I really don't think that we can really understate everything that Kenneth Copeland has said and done over the past couple of years, but there are a few things that are worth noting about Kenneth Copeland. For one, is that he does not fly commercial airline, like at all. I'm about to make the case that he's literally allergic to what we would consider to be like the common people, like, or what he would consider to be the peasant people. So there's a show that's on the Victory Channel that's called Believers' Voices of Victory. And it's one of those shows where he and this other far-right evangelical dipshit by the name of Jesse Duplantis do a lot of far-right evangelical fear-mongering kind of preaching and ranting and raving. And on this particular episode, they were questioned about their use of private jets. And I mean, like, their luxury jets are astronomically expensive. You have to keep in mind that Kenneth Copeland's net worth is approximately $300 million. And this is a guy who pretends to do a bunch of charitable work for people. He's the kind of person who says that if you give me money, you will be saved and ordained by God. That kind of thing. And keep in mind, with that $300 million, he does not pay taxes because churches do not have to pay taxes because of the separation of church and state. Only in this context, seemingly not in any other context that has to do with the Christian fascist takeover of democracy as we know it, but I digress. Because of that money, he has used $20 million, again, of donated money that he does not have to pay taxes on a private luxury jet that was used for trips to a ski resort and a private ranch. So in this episode, Kenneth Copeland and Jesse Duplantis are gonna make the argument that this use of this money is justified. Take a listen.
The world is in such a shape, we can't get there without this.
That's right.
We've got to have this. We would have, the mess that the airlines are in today, I would have to stop. I'm being very conservative. At least 75 to 80, more like 90% of what we're doing, because you can't get there from here.
It's impossible.
I'm sorry, what? You need a private fucking luxurious jet that takes you to your private ranch and fucking ski resorts. Are you like admitting in a way that what you do 90% of the time is go on vacation and live in luxury? Are you saying that? Because that's what it sounds like you're saying. But go on. I cut you off.
So and this was such a good illustration. I just, the Lord impressed me. That's why we're on that airplane. We can talk to God.
Glory to God.
But why can't you talk to God directly using commercial airline? That still does not make sense.
You can't manage that today.
Right.
This dope-filled world.
Right.
And get in a long tube with a bunch of demons.
Right. That's exactly the
And
point.
it's deadly.
A long tube of demons. That is what commercial airline is to Kenneth Copeland. I want to show you something. This is a really good clip from Inside Edition. This is an impromptu, spontaneous interview that they conducted right as he was entering his vehicle in Austin, Texas. And they wanted to know more about this particular tube of demons comment, who asked some pretty simple questions and got a very interesting response. Take a listen.
The main reason is because of the need. If I flew commercial, I'd have to stop 65% of what I'm doing.
Now keep in mind that this particular impromptu interview took place a few years after the initial episode where he made the Tube of Demons comment. But the fact that he went from 90 to 65% proves that he is just pulling shit out of his ass.
Isn't it true that you want to fly commercial so that you can fly in luxury? How much money did you pay for Tyler Perry's Gulfstream jet, for example?
Well, for example, that's really none of your business, but...
Isn't it the business of your donors?
Listen, I paid. You kind of caught me off guard here, okay?
$3 million is the answer to that question. Kenneth Copeland paid $3 million to buy Tyler Perry's airplane. Kenneth Copeland just has $3 million just lying around. Nobody, and especially a prosperity gospel pastor, is able to work so hard that they can just blow off $3 million on a private fucking airplane.
My wife thinks Inside Edition is, oh yeah. Now, thank you, Lord. Help me. Let me pray this thing.
Well, let me just ask you a really simple question. A lot of people think it's unbecoming for a preacher to live a life of luxury and to fly around in private jets. What's your response to that?
Very simple. It takes a lot of money to do what we do. We have brought over 100, let's see, the latest figures just came out, 122 million people to the Lord Jesus Christ.
Or more accurately, you scammed 122 million people.
Last May, I was scheduled for Lagos, Nigeria. That's a long ways. I had a week off, and I was scheduled for Peru. And I prayed about it, and I thought, I'm not missing that dedication in Jerusalem. Without the airplane that we have that I bought from Tyler Perry, and I didn't pay anywhere. And Tyler's one of the greatest guys. He made that airplane so cheap for me, I couldn't help but buy it.
So he just flipped on his own story. He went from commercial airline is a tube of demons to Tyler Perry made this airplane so cheap I had to go buy it at Pick and Save. Anybody remember Pick and Save?
Do you ever use your private jets to go visit your vacation homes, for example?
Yes, I do that.
Okay. Again, getting back to the comment, you said that you don't like to fly commercial because you don't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. Do you really believe that human beings are demons?
No, I do not. And don't you ever say I did.
Except, yeah, he did.
You can't manage that today.
Right.
This dope-filled world.
Right.
And get in a long tube with a bunch of demons.
Kenneth Copeland is a real crackerjack, and I mean a super crackerjack. Let me show you one of his sermons where COVID was the topic of the day. This is at the height of the pandemic, by the way, just so we're clear.
COVID-19!
COVID-19!
Burn. Well, I'm telling you, it gets hot down there. I mean, like Jesse says, it's Africa hot down there, man. And it gets... Are you listening to me? Because it's right there on the coast. It gets muggy, and that's what it takes to kill this thing. It hates heat. It hates humidity. It hates water. It just dies. I hollered at the top of my voice, in the name of Jesus, you get back up there where you belong. Boy, up it went.
This fucking weirdo is worth $300 million.
In the name of Jesus.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
Standing in the office of the prophet of God, I execute judgment on you, COVID-19.
Oh, Ramash.
I execute judgment on you, Satan, you destroyer, you killer. You get out, we break your power, you get off this nation. I demand judgment on you. I demand a vaccination to come immediately.
Yes.
I call you done. I call you gone. You come down from your place of authority, destroyer. You come down and you crawl on your belly like God commanded you when he put his foot on your head in the Garden of Eden. You will destroy through COVID-19. No more!
No more. No more.
No
more.
Is finished.
Finished.
It is over. And the United States of America is healed and well again.
Listen, y'all, okay? God damn it, dude. That shit is fucking hilarious. It's just the, like, cartoonishly supervillain tone of voice that Kenneth Copeland harnesses, along with his insecure co-host of his sermon. It's just so fucking silly because, like, he's, like, unsure as to whether or not the words he is saying has any weight to them, especially in the height of a very serious global pandemic. So while Kenneth Copeland is like at literally 1 million, and he's just like, I demand that COVID-19 is finished. Well, the other guys is like, yeah, it's finished. It's gone. It's smoked to hell. Yeah. Whatever you say, dude. Now, listen, jokes aside, because we could lampoon on Kenneth Copeland all day. He is just a treasure trove of funny moments. But the problem is that he is still a part of the New Apostolic Reformation movement, and he harnesses the Seven Mountain Mandate ideology. Being a televangelist and a former musician, he uses the arts and entertainment pillar / mountain part of the Seven Mountain Mandate. And you gotta keep in mind that when it comes to 122 million new recruits, this is an attempt to influence the Christian identity movement and to thus accelerate the Christian fascist agenda. And this is what we gotta keep in mind when we consider other celebrities, in particular, who follow the Seven Mountains Mandate, such as Butch Hartman, the creator of the Fairly Odd Parents.
Odd Parents, Fairly Odd Parents. It lets you live when you were a kid with Fairly Odd Parents. Yeah, right.
I used to watch the Fairly Odd Parents as a kid. It wasn't like my favorite show of all time, but whenever it was on, I watched it, and I guess as a kid, I liked it enough to keep watching. And of course, when Danny Phantom came on, I watched that show too. You see, Nickelodeon in particular, they're not like a Christian television network. They're pretty secular, or like, not religious one way or the other. They're just kind of like a kids network, although a very controversial kids network with what has come out recently about Dan Schneider and, the whole damn industry, but that's another topic for a completely other time. But it's worth just mentioning that this is the same industry that has Dan Schneider involved, because Butch Hartman is also involved in the same industrial complex. I mentioned Danny Phantom earlier, and honestly, I like Danny Phantom in concept. It's about a boy who gets ghost powers, and he can pretty much combat ghosts by seeing them. I like the goth chick in it. I don't remember her name. I don't give enough of a fuck, no offense. But I think, aesthetically speaking, Danny Phantom was kind of cool looking, right? But this is where things start to get ugly.
Nickelodeon came to me, they said, hey, we love Fairly Odd Parents. Do you have anything else? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. I'd been toying with a boys' action show, and I wanted it to have a really cool action name. Remember Johnny Quest? Who remembers Johnny Quest? Yeah, Johnny Quest. Yeah, all the older people. Yeah, I remember Johnny Quest. Yeah, so all right. So Johnny Quest. If I could come up with a cool name like Quest or Lightning or Thunder, I thought I landed on the name Phantom. I thought this would be really fun. It's a kid with powers. He has like ghost powers, and he fights ghosts. Now, he doesn't fight like the ghosts of dead people, because I'm a Christian guy. I'm not going to do that. And I get a lot of people asking me who are Christians, you're a Christian. How can you do a show about a kid with ghost powers? You know why I can do this show? He's the light coming into the darkness, and he fights the bad guys. That's what he does. All of my shows, now I don't do Christian shows, but I have Christian values in my shows. Why? Because I'm wise as a serpent and I'm harmless as a dove. Exactly. Because I'm working in an industry. They only want to make money. That's all they want to do. And if you can be wise and use your gifts and talents and go amongst them and put your values in there and do it surreptitiously where they're not really noticing, sooner or later, they're going to notice something different about the place they're working. Everybody who works for me, that's worked for me for 15 years, says it's the best job they've ever had. Because they have an atmosphere of peace, of creativity, of joy, and that only comes because I'm a Christian and I love Jesus Christ.
There is a lot to unpack here, and I think that a lot of this is really devious in ways that somebody who isn't really keen on listening to Christian fascist talking points wouldn't really pick up. So let me help you with this. First of all, he mentioned the biblical phrase, wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, which is a reference to Matthew 10:16. In this verse, this is something that Jesus is advising his own disciples. If I'm to interpret this in good faith, which I believe I am, this particular verse has to do with being wise and also harming nobody, being a pacifist. But the thing is that in this context, that really does not bode well at all. If Jesus, hypothetically, were to tell Butch Hartman to be as wise as a serpent but harm nobody, who would he be not harming in this case? Nickelodeon? The other animators that he works with? His co-workers? No, that's not what this is about. Being wise as a serpent has a whole new meaning here that does not apply to Jesus being persecuted by the fucking Roman Empire, which the disciples would probably revolt against if Jesus had not said to be pacifistic towards. No, Butch Hartman wants to be influential in the cartoon animation industry with his own Christian values. He wants to insert Christian influence into a secular environment. Being wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove in this particular context of him being deceitful is not my own assertion. He's actually consistent with this tactic. Let me explain what I mean. Within the summer of 2018, Butch Hartman launched a Kickstarter campaign to fundraise for what he would call the Oaxis Entertainment Network. Oaxis being spelled O-A-X-I-S. The thesis statement was that he was going to make this particular network family-friendly. To which, okay, that's fair. We do need family-friendly, in particular, friendly content for children. That is, not Skibbity Toilet and Elsa and Spider-Man videos of her getting pregnant. And okay, we're going down a different rabbit hole, completely different topic. But yeah, I agree. There is a lot of filth that children are exposed to, whether it be on YouTube or television for that matter. And I'm not saying this as some kind of fear-mongering Christian or anything like that. I'm saying that as somebody who is a fucking edgelord myself, and who does still recognize that there is a lot of filth being exposed to children. So this mission statement, I don't disagree with this. But you also gotta keep in mind that there is a lot of family-friendly content for children. And that's not to say that there shouldn't be more family-friendly content for children, but Butch Hartman here is not pioneering jack shit here. So what's the dealio, right? Well, this is where things get interesting, because this particular Kickstarter campaign raised about $268,000. Quite a hefty sum of money right there. Now, what I'm about to show you is from this video that was made by a YouTuber by the name of Sparks. I'm only referencing this because of the fact that I have looked everywhere for a more primary source of this, yet I could not find any of that. So Sparks, huge credit to him for making a very long and in-depth video about Butch Hartman, much more in-depth that I'm going to go into this episode. So go check out the description for a link to that video if you want to really learn about how devious Butch Hartman is. Anyway, back on topic, Butch Hartman later that year in 2018 attended a Christian conference called the Wealth Builders Group. And with the Wealth Builders Group, he actually went on to go say this.
We're going to change culture. We're going to save families. We're going to speak to them in parables. Guys, I am not making TBN. This is not TBN. My stuff has got to be today. It's got to be hip. It's got to be cool. It's got to reach the secular people who we're trying to reach.
We're going to save families. It's got to reach secular people. This is beginning to sound like a particular strategy, like the Seven Mountains Mandate. Oh, wait a minute.
But I got to hear him speak, and he was talking about the seven mountains of influence. When he got to the mountain of entertainment, my heart just leapt out of my chest. And I turned to my wife and I said, it's us.
On the Wealth Builders website in particular, they have a whole page dedicated to the Seven Mountains Mandate, talking about Billy Graham, focus on the family in Colorado Spring, K-Love, Kendrick Brothers, Chick-fil-A. These could make this rabbit hole dig even fucking deeper, but we really don't have enough fucking time to go into this today, especially the likes of Billy Graham, Chick-fil-A, and focus on the family. But yeah, Butch Hartman is a Christian fascist. Don't believe me? Butch Hartman and his wife were featured on an article by the Christian Post. In particular, it has a lot of really choice things to say about trans people. Quote, raising a child in this brave new world of social media, preferred pronouns, and enough consumable media to last 1,000 lifetimes exposes them very early on to influences that threaten the foundational truth of faith and family. Again, referencing the Seven Mountains Mandate right there. Continuing on, gone are the days of managing daily television consumption and the latest music release that might contain a suggestive lyric or two. Parents trying to raise their kid to be moral, upstanding citizens are being hurdled through a blender of wokeness, gender ideology, and immorality at an alarming rate. For a Christian parent, or any parent of moral decency for that matter, what can be done about it? Quite simply, it is imperative that we expose our children early to the foundational truth in the Bible. End quote. It goes on to introduce Butch Hartman as an animator and that he believes that we should be pouring scripture into kids' minds and that it is best for them to get the gospel message through the use of animation. Again, the Seven Mountains Mandate. And this is a quote from Butch Hartman himself in the article. Quote, "No matter what you are going through, no matter what is happening in the world, we want to remind you that you're not alone. We want to remind you that God is there through animation. We want to remind you that you have a Savior. We want to remind you that you can talk to God anytime you want and He'll answer your prayers, and you just have to listen to Him and open up yourself to Him." End quote. His wife, Julianne Hartman, also had some really interesting things to say as well, in particular to Jesus and mass shootings. Quote, "With all of the devastation in our schools, with the shootings and all that stuff, we decided we needed to make cartoons to help kids. Let's make content where kids now can get an understanding of the love of Jesus and the protection of the Lord through something that they can relate to the most, which is cartoons." Now you have to keep in mind is that there's nothing wrong with making cartoons, especially about something that you're passionate on. And sure, I'll even give them a bone. If you're a Christian and you want to make cartoons, that's cool too. But this is a particular project, being OAX's, that was stated to just be family friendly. It was not stated that it was a Christian vehicle to be peddling onto children until after the money was raised on the Kickstarter. That's why saying that you are as wise as a serpent but harmless as a dove in this particular context is not the same as Jesus telling that to his disciples, because he's rather being deceitful, basically lying through omission.
And if you can be wise and use your gifts and talents and go amongst them and put your values in there and do it surreptitiously where they're not really noticing, sooner or later, they're going to notice something different about the place they're working.
Another thing that I want to talk about in particular with how he addressed his workers. Yeah, can we play that back a second?
Everybody who works for me, that's worked for me for 15 years, says it's the best job they've ever had. Because they have an atmosphere of peace, of creativity, of joy, and that only comes because I'm a Christian and I love Jesus Christ.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Here is Tara Strong talking to Butch Hartman about the original voice actress for Timmy Turner, who committed suicide.
No, she had a very prolific career. She was awesome.
Doing great, and then she ended up passing away, and I think Tara actually had something to do with that, and so that was probably your fault. No, I'm kidding.
What the fuck? Can you imagine working for somebody and one of your coworkers ends their life, and then your boss says that it was probably your fault? That is messed up. And there is no justifying that. That is not the kind of behavior that a civilized society, let alone a civilized fucking human being, would ever fucking say out loud. What about Kuro the artist, who was commissioned by Butch Hartman to make cartoons for the O-Axis network? But then the O-Axis network went under its controversy, so Butch Hartman never really even paid Kuro for the work because it was never published. But the thing is that Kuro did all of this animation and hard work. So Kuro did this commission and didn't get paid. He was denied payment and worked for free, essentially. And keep in mind, this was a $1,400 contract, which is a pretty fucking low contract for fucking animation, for crying out loud. And Butch Hartman was sued by Kuro in 2020, and he won the lawsuit, but he was ghosted shortly thereafter and was just replaced by another worker. And see, that's the point, is that Butch Hartman is a fucking liar, and he uses his workers like pawns. Holy shit, we're like an hour into the podcast, and we haven't even scratched the surface as to how these fucking people are all involved in a Christian fascist plot to overthrow democracy. Butch Hartman, right here, is just a small part of that. And I mean a very small part. Let's get into Glenn Beck. My aunt is a huge fan of Glenn Beck, and I remember having to sit her down and be like, this guy is a fucking nut job. I mean, for real. The problem is, however, is that Glenn Beck is still very much a part of this new apostolic reformation movement. And of course, it's very much in line with the Seven Mountains Mandate strategy, as his influence is predominantly on the media. You see, Glenn Beck has a history of working for Fox News, and then after he left Fox News, he founded what is now today referred to as Blaze Media. One of the most memorable moments of Glenn Beck's Fox News career is this clip right here.
Jesus conquered death. He wasn't victimized. He chose to give his life. He did have a choice. If he was a victim, and this theology was true, then Jesus would have come back from the dead and made the Jews pay for what they did.
Excuse me? What did the Jews do to Jesus? Because last I checked, Jesus was Jewish. That's like why he was so cool in the first place. It's because his Jewish faith informed his behavior. Christianity wasn't a thing until generations later. If anything, Christianity being its own worst enemy and kind of taking its own people out, this is what Glenn Beck is just kind of reenacting here for all of us to see in modern times. Except instead of the church institution taking out the Diggers movement or the Cathars, it is Glenn Beck telling you not to question authority. You see, Glenn Beck has to kind of mythologize Jesus in miraculous ways to make him seem so unbelievable yet omnipotent, and for you to obey the established order that is the institutional church. However, the thing is that Glenn Beck, being the Christian fascist that he is, has to sort of masculinize Jesus in order to show that he's tough, he's powerful, and so he has to frame Jesus as not a victim. But what this does is that it objectifies Jesus and turning him into a weapon. As I've explained earlier into this episode, he's using Jesus to accelerate his own political propaganda. And what is this particular message that he is sending? It's really just him trying to say that oppressive structures within our society don't exist, and that what Jesus went through when he was crucified was not a symbol of torture from the Roman Empire, but instead some crazy anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that pundits like him will continue to use to distract people from questioning authority and questioning the legitimacy of the existence of billionaires in our society today. And of course, I must say this for the literal billionth time today, that anti-Semitism, especially anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that run with anti-Semitic narratives, like that some cabal of satanic Jews are controlling the plot of everything or whatever, it's crazy bullshit. That type of shit is specifically used by the media and corporate news, like, of course, Fox News in this context. That is all continuously used to control people, to prevent the people from organizing and revolting against the billionaire class. And that is exactly what this is. This is a Christian fascist using Jesus, who was a Jew, for the record, and it informed his actions as a revolutionary back in the day. He's stripping him of who he was in order to attack the Jews. So yeah, if it wasn't obvious already, Glenn Beck is not only a Christian fascist, but he's also an anti-Semitic Christian fascist, which I guess is a bit redundant to highlight, but he's like specifically anti-Semitic. For example, during his Restoring Courage tour, where he was supposed to go to Jerusalem, in hopes to restore his image by hosting a rally there, he went through a really interesting series of revelations, and I mean it in a very anti-biblical way. I want you to take a few minutes to listen to what he has to say about the Holocaust, because during this Restoring Courage tour in 2011, he made special plans to go to Poland to visit the Auschwitz concentration camp. By the way, what is it with fascists like Elon Musk and Ben Shapiro, so on and so forth? What is it with them in particular visiting Nazi concentration camps? The purpose of visiting these camps is to hopefully learn from the past so we don't repeat it. But what's fascinating is that Glenn Beck proposes an interesting thesis that he himself is also curious as to why the Holocaust happened in the first place. And he really wants to define this during his research and his visit on his tour. Take a listen.
I'm going over to Poland in a couple of weeks on something that's a venture that I'm doing, and I'm not going to do a special on Auschwitz per se. I'm visiting Auschwitz, but I'm talking about the town, which is just a few miles outside of the gate. And I have been doing my research and trying to figure out, how did this happen? Poland, I didn't know this when I first started doing my research, Poland rose up, a lot of Poles rose up to try to help the Jews. But they had nothing left. They had no arms, the Jews couldn't defend themselves, they had no state, they had nothing. We're at least at this point, we have a Jewish state that can defend themselves, but the world says they shouldn't.
If it isn't obvious already, he is referring to what is considered to be the nation state of so-called Israel. And we've done a lot of episodes on Israel already, and the next episode is, obviously, surprise, Israel. I promise you're gonna like it. I've been working pretty hard at it. But we understand that the particular attacks that took place on October 7, 2023 was a single retaliation to a much larger history of Israel being a violent settler colonial nation state like the United States is. You'll also find out in the following episode after this one, when that one comes out, that Israel itself is not particularly safe for Jews, considering that Israel is a settler colonial nation state and its government specifically operates as a militaristically imperialist one. It seeks to expand its borders. This is why genocide is taking place in Gaza and the West Bank right now, because of course that's not the be-all end-all. It wants to conquer that entire region, so it is making threats with other parts of the region, like Syria and Jordan and Egypt, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq. It's getting crazy over there. Israel has some powerful friends, like the United States, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom. These are really powerful friends, but Glenn Beck is right when he says that the majority of people don't really want Israel committing genocide or existing in the first place, particularly because Israel, or more specifically the Zionist movement, does not particularly define what it means to be Jewish. Throughout the Palestine region, and I'm not just referring to Gaza and the West Bank, I am referring to the whole region here. Jews and Arabs, they lived peacefully, they coexisted. And as anarchists, we understand that the state exists through coercion in order to maintain dominance. It is a might makes right philosophy and principle that you have to stand by in order to support this model of running a society. So Israel, that is a nation state that operates on militaristic, expansive imperialism, yeah, you're gonna get a lot of fucking imperialist coercion coming from the Zionist movement. So this particularly is going to be expanded on much further in the next episode. I'm only highlighting on this because what Glenn Beck is trying to do here is say that the Holocaust is the reason why we should have Israel. And Israel literally cannot exist without doing settler colonial violence in the first place. So that's the issue here. There's a huge contradiction. Because it doesn't hold like local anti-Semitism in like Poland or Germany accountable. It doesn't do that. The solution that Israel should protect Jews is actually doing the opposite. Because once you pair Zionism to the entire Jewish spectrum, especially considering that it does not even represent the majority of Jews in the first place, according to a Pew Research study that I did in a few episodes back, the anti-Semitism that was a product of that particular region of the world was due to a long string of anti-Semitic violence that had been happening for centuries that led up to the pogroms throughout the centuries in Europe. So essentially, what these other already established colonial countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Spain, all these countries were doing, they were saying that Israel can just be a place where Jews can be the bourgeois class, which is anti-Semitic. Like, the whole framing of Israel's existence in and of itself is anti-Semitic. And what's crazy is that it is propped up by the most anti-Semitic countries in the fucking world. Which should tell you a lot when Benjamin Netanyahu is using Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill as political devices in his own talking points. I'm getting off topic here. What I want to say is that Glenn Beck weaponizing the Holocaust to accelerate Israel is anti-Semitic. There's no other way around this. It is anti-Semitic. Because first of all, if this was about revenge for what happened throughout the Holocaust, which is not necessarily something I want to dig into right now in terms of how we want to deal with this, but if that's what this was about, then the target would be like the German government or the ADF or German neo-Nazis that exist today. Yeah, there are German neo-Nazis that currently exist in 2024. That should worry you, especially when the German government is responding harder to pro-Palestinian protests. It's a huge disappointment that there really wasn't an effective denazification that took place within the government, especially not long enough to last until today, where, of course, it is so bad over in Germany in terms of how they're responding to the rise of fascism over there. Because it seems like they're responding to fucking nothing right now. And instead, they are propping up bigger and more scarier fascist groups like the Zionist movement and the U.S. empire. And the last thing I want to talk about this particular caveat is, why didn't they fight back? Well, the thing is that they fucking did. As an anti-fascist, I want to give a huge fuck you to Glenn Beck. And I mean a very huge fuck you for what I'm about to tell y'all about. This is so fascinating. So, in the German language, the Sonderkommando is usually the person who would be like a Jewish hostage of these concentration camps, and they'd be coerced by the state, the police, to enact these horrific and disgusting acts of genocide by gunpoint. And they'd be Jews killing other Jews and disposing of bodies of Jewish victims in the crematoriums. So these particular class of people who were coerced to, this is really hard to go through. It's really, really hard to fucking talk about sometimes. Because the thing is that they did revolt. And Glenn Beck is saying they did not. 80 years ago, in 1944, the Sonderkommando rebelled against the Nazi officers in the Birkenau camp. He is also completely ignoring the Warsaw Ghetto uprisings that took place the year before. By this whole framing that he is making, that this Holocaust that we could have prevented is the reason for Israel, he is by extension saying that the largest Jewish uprising throughout the Holocaust in World War II didn't exist. He is erasing history right there. And this isn't just some fringe bullshit that I found out. This is a crucial part of World War II history that he is explicitly leaving out intentionally to prop up the nation state of Israel. Everything about this fucking crazy man is anti-Semitic. Glenn Beck having a particular rally after a visit to a concentration camp, which is a rally that is so fueled by the fascist machine, is not lost on me. And knowing who Glenn Beck is and his psychopathic beliefs, I'm not surprised that he believes in this shit, and I'm also not surprised that he is a Zionist fucking evangelical piece of shit. By the way, around the time that this whole tour was taking place, during the Oslo shooting in Norway, he went on to say that the people who were campers at the particular camp in Norway, not to be confused with a concentration camp, but he referred to the victims as Hitler Youth. Take a listen.
I was following the news of the shooting in Norway and the explosion in Norway, which happened, what, on Friday?
Yeah, the explosion was, and then we left the air, and and then he went to, the camp.
Yeah, well, when we heard the explosion, everybody was willing to say, it's Muslim extremists! It's Muslim extremists! I don't think we made a comment on it because we didn't know, other than there was a bombing that happened. And as the thing started to unfold, and then there was a shooting at a political camp, which sounds a little like, the Hitler Youth or whatever. I mean, who does a camp for kids that's all about politics? Disturbing.
Yeah, disturbing? Hey, you've got something of your own that is called the Principles of the 9/12 Project. So, what are these 9 principles? Well, let's take a look right here. So, the 9 principles are 1, America is a good place, not perfect, but good. 2, I believe in God, and He is the center of my life. Alright, we already have a nationalist and totalitarian Christian belief in the first 2 rules here. Anyway, point I'm trying to make here is that Glenn Beck talking about how the people who were victims of this nearby camp being Hitler Youth is a bit ironic considering that he has his own set of programs that are targeting towards kids and that they themselves are political. And they have some pretty hyper-Christian nationalistic views, like right off the fucking bat. Now, there are some that I thought were pretty reasonable. Like the third one being, I must try to be better, a more honest person than I was yesterday. That's reasonable. I think that is something that we should all try to do in our lives. But that's also very much common sense, which is also something that he has also done and would write a book called Common Sense. But the thing is, though, is that he is pairing what we could argue as common sense here with hyper-Christian nationalist fascist views and along with his other anti-Semitic beliefs as well, and he's trying to teach that towards kids. And that right there is deceitful. It is also reminiscent of another Bible verse that we referred to earlier. Wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, which, oof. These crazy nut jobs are definitely taking notes from each other. The next person we're going to be talking about is Andrew Womack, who is a self-described faith healer. And very similarly to Kenneth Copeland, he is a televangelist. He is one of the 6 founders of the Truth and Liberty Coalition, which is an organization that believes that God has given all Christians of the world, quote, a mandate to bring godly change to our world through the 7 spheres of societal influence. And of course, you know what those are if you've paid attention to the 7 Mountains Mandate. So besides having his last name sound like a creepy Star Wars character, Andrew Womack is real bedrock into the 7 Mountains Mandate dealio. Like it is nobody's business.
Can we use your declaration of our dependence on God as our declaration of independence and use the Bible as a constitution and have a, I don't know what you'd want to call it, a grace revolution, but a new, do it again.
You know, Molly, I don't believe we need to come up with a new constitution. The one we have is fine. The problem is people aren't following it. Our Constitution, I mean, if you were to put it into biblical terms, if they were still writing the Bible today, I believe that the American Constitution and the founding of this nation would be in Scripture as one of the great things that God has done. So there's nothing wrong with our Constitution. It's the fact that we aren't following it. And, you know, I've dealt with this before. I've actually told people that if Trump gets back in, there are people that are saying that they will physically fight. We've seen riots in the streets, you know, back during the 2020 and the George Floyd and riots and all these things. And I've actually had people say that if Trump was to be elected, if we got a conservative Congress, that they fear that we would have another civil war. And you know what? I don't want a civil war. I don't know anybody that does. But would it be worth it to turn this nation back? I believe it would.
He is directly right here, unequivocally, advocating for a theocracy in the United States. In order for this whole plot of putting God into the Constitution and making people worship God by constitutional law work, the church would need to specifically be involved in the state. Yeah, we only had just shook up this pop, so we're going to twist the cap off and see what happens.
That at 6 p.m. Colorado time, we're going to be having another Truth and Liberty broadcast, and I'm going to have Butch and Julianne Hartman with us.
Hold on. What? Yeah, if you and the audience wished that we were going to be listening to more bullshit from Butch Hartman, then your wish came true, you piece of shit.
They did Tough Puppy, Fairly Odd Parents, a number of cartoon type of things. And anyway, they're breaking away and doing some brand new things. We're going to be talking about that. For those of you who have watched our Truth and Liberty, we've focused primarily on politics since we really started this in January, but it's not limited to that. We are going to be talking about invading every area of influence in our culture. And of course, getting into television and arts and entertainments is a big part of it. And so this will be the first time that we've really had this kind of broadcast on, but it's going to be really, really good.
And once again, we have the Seven Mountains Mandate being, shouted out for the billionth time by these fucking fascist freaks. Are you noticing a pattern yet at home? Because we're noticing that these people who have some kind of political or social influence, whether it be within the media, within a media that they found on the side, within deep into non-political parts of the media, like particularly entertainment and the arts, and as well as their own televangelists, so on and so forth. They're using propaganda to reach to the common people to instill these very reactionary and hyper-nationalistic beliefs, and using God as a weapon, as a piece of propaganda for controlling the masses. Such as an individual by the name of Sean Foyt, who I will be calling Sean Foot for the rest of this episode, because Sean Foot ran for the 3rd Congressional District of California.
America's not just a country. It's a legacy built on a foundation of hope and truth, a beacon to the world. Millions want to come here. Even more wish they could be like us.
Do not flatter yourself. This is why LGBT kids are being kicked out of their homes, because they don't exactly want to be like you. They want to be queer, and yet they are being marginalized and put on the street. According to the National Library of Medicine, research has shown that those who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning LGBTQ+ have a 120% higher risk of experiencing some form of homelessness. On the study, the conclusion reads that the prevalence and incidence of youth homelessness reveal a significant need for prevention and youth-centric systems and services, as well as strategies to address disproportionate risk of certain subpopulations, end quote. So, yeah, don't flatter yourself. The reason why kids are being homeless at such an extreme rate is because of you guys.
If we lose our identity, how will the world learn from our greatness? Is there any hope? Can we trust anyone? We need a new generation of leaders. Leaders who don't seek a career, but are willing to sacrifice their careers to fight for what is right. Leaders like Sean Foyt.
Yeah, this is Sean Feucht's congressional advertisement for his election in 2020, which he lost. Why do you think he lost?
Sean doesn't look like the average politician because he's not.
Of course, this is an audio podcast, and I don't do editing on these audio podcasts. If you look up pictures of Sean Feucht, you will find that he has long hippie-looking hair that most conservatives would identify as hippie. He has a pretty blonde bunch of hair, and he looks pretty straight-looking otherwise. Kind of like a very suburban guitar teacher that you would just drop your kids off after school and have him teach your kids how to play Jingle Bell Rocks or Enter Sandman, basically. That's pretty much my description of what this guy looks like.
A man of faith, a man of mission, a man of character and integrity. Not driven by ego, but purpose. A man who knows what feeding the hungry, protecting the vulnerable, and fighting for one's beliefs is all about. A man with a guitar and a purpose. A father with a loving heart. A leader with track record.
Alright, why don't we take a look at his track record? You see, Sean Feucht is somewhat of a minister, somewhat of a musician. He used to be a worship leader at Bethel Church and was the founder of the Let Us Worship movement. The Let Us Worship movement is an interesting vehicle for Sean Feucht because this is a movement that frames the whole religion discussion when it comes to religious involvement in the state as Christians are the victims of this dynamic instead of Christians are taking over the state, which is what they want to do. Otherwise, the Seven Mountains Mandate bullshit wouldn't even exist in the first place. Sean uses his hippie hair and his guitar playing as propaganda for the Seven Mountains Mandate, basically. So he holds what are called worship protests against things like mask mandates for COVID-19 and vaccines. He's also held stages next to Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, trying to antagonize and bait Black Lives Matter protesters and thus causing more friction between protesters and counter-protesters, or in this case, Black Lives Matter protesters and far-right fascist goddamn nutjobs. We will talk more about this later in the episode. He also recently said something about Israel in terms of supporting the end times, which we will also get into later as well, because this is gonna get some real spicy shit later, y'all.
Sean is taking a stand millions like you and I need to take if we are determined to better the future for our children and grandchildren. He is known and loved by millions for his music and missions. Now, he is willing to sacrifice his calling for a greater one, to restore the identity, values, and morals of this great nation.
Keep an ear out for these buzzwords like moral and great, especially like great nation. Keep an ear out for these types of buzzwords, because these buzzwords are going to be used numerous times to elicit some kind of emotional reaction within the viewer or listener in this case. Because when they talk about identity, that is when things get a little dicey, because that is when they're specifically talking about enforcing an identity that is nationalistic with Christian characteristics. Christian nationalism, Christian fascism, accelerating the fascist movement to maintain a national identity and to pass policies and legislation that enforce this identity verbatim.
How do I know this? I'm his wife and the mother of his 4 children. As a family, we are committed to this race. For us, our children, and our future.
I'm not going to sit back and watch and wait. It's time for my generation to step forward and join the fight for America. Stand with me and let's take action and become the solution. I'm Sean Feucht and I'm running for Congress.
Thank fucking God that, he did not win, because this man is a huge cult leader. Like, straight up. He founds numerous movements within the Christian right that all accelerate the Seven Mountains Mandate to a high degree, such as the Hold the Line movement, which is a youth program that is meant to indoctrinate kids and young adults into opposing what he refers to as the progressive agenda being pushed into America. So this is a far-right Christian nationalist propaganda machine that is very similar to Butch Hartman's Oaxis attempt. He's also created what is called Light a Candle, which is a program that hosts a short-term mission for kids and sponsorships. It's the same fucking scam the Mormon Church pulls. It's the same fucking scam. Trying to peddle the Christian goddamn far-right bullshit into nations like the Philippines. And how has peddling Christianity in the global south been going for these countries like the Philippines? Well, they elected Rodrigo Duterte, and according from an article from Human Rights Watch back in 2018, he has killed over 12,000 people who he suspected of drug crimes. And keep in mind, these are suspects, people who have not had a due process. They were just summarily executed. And that's the issue here, is that we could call him a fascist outright just because of that alone. But the thing is that that is what happens when you got white-ass Christians from Mormon and evangelical circles going into missions in those parts of the world. You teach them very right-wing and very harmful reactionary views that get you this position. I mean, look at Augusto Pinochet, look at Jorge Upico, look at all of these Latin American dictatorships that have pretty much destroyed all of Latin America. Big thank you, of course, to that from American corporations. We can get into that a whole other time, but that's besides the point. The point is that is harming the communities in which you claim that this is helping. And in fact, the problem is that this hippy-dippy, liberal-looking aesthetic is harmful because he actually serves the Seven Mountains Mandate. Not to mention that this whole campaign ad is riddled with very, very white supremacist dog whistles. I actually only showed you the second half of it because the first half is actually pretty disgusting, because all it does is that it singles out Democrats in a pretty dishonest way. And keep in mind, of course, I am always criticizing Democrats. I've done episodes criticizing Democrats in the past. But the thing is that this is using Democrats like they are part of the anti-fascist global cabal, QAnon, all, you know what I mean, the rabbit hole of far-right goddamn nut jobbery bullshit. He's also supported Carrie Lake, who is a Republican from Arizona that lost, but asserts that she won in the 2020 election, so she's also denying the election results of her own election, so that's not great. And also Doug Mastriano, he supported him as well, who is a lunatic that has ran against the Pennsylvania governor. I could make episodes about these people, but that would make this much longer than it already is. What's important here is that in 2023, Sean Foote would announce a campaign tour called, quote, The Kingdom to the Capital, end quote, which was co-founded by Turning Point USA. And yes, we're going to be talking about Charlie Kirk next, because holy shit, Charlie Kirk is absolutely goddamn nuts. Sean Foote and Charlie Kirk want to visit every capital in the United States with the specific focus of swing states to put an influence on the upcoming 2024 election. So they're really filibustering super hard. And when I say filibustering, I mean these specific people with their media outlets, of course, like Turning Point USA, they are really pushing against quote-unquote woke agenda and whatever they define as woke agenda. They're looking to, of course, strip people of their body autonomy, stripping people of abortion rights and gender-affirming care. It's all a spectacle, and at the end of the day, what we need to see is that they want to get people to leave schools. Like, they want to gut the schools that we currently actually have so that they can necessitate, politically speaking, through policy, their own Christian institution. I want to start by just briefly showing you this Fox News report that Charlie Kirk was on, because this guy sent back his master's degree, literally, and it was so funny. I'm sorry, I do have to you'll see what I mean. Just play the clip, it's funny as hell.
Well, if you're just tuning in this morning, I made the decision to send back my master's degree from Harvard as a message, an intentional one, to higher education.
Oh dear.
Now, if you look at the
Is your mom
shields, if you
gonna
look
be
at the
mad?
shields on the diploma,
Is your mom going to be mad?
very mad. Return to sender. Right here, and then I'll just sign it for good.
Like, what was up with that? That was so fucking weird. I know it's Fox News, and I mean, Fox News is always shit, but I mean, like, that was like a new low. Yeah, I got a Harvard degree. I'm just gonna, you know, like a fucking child, just like scribble on, you know, Harvard and put crooked theory or crack theory or whatever on it, and then just like a little kid, just return to sender. Just like, what are you doing, homie? Okay, we're gonna actually fast forward just a little bit in that particular interview because we got to get to where they talked to Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk had some really interesting things to say about education, actually. Play the clip.
My good friend Charlie Kirk is also taking on the left's agenda, launching Turning Point Academy, K-12 school and more like it. He joins us now. Charlie, thanks for being here. I feel like you'll appreciate the sentiment of that. The gatekeepers, the credentialing of higher education, they need to keep that credential and be the gatekeepers to determine who's who in elite society.
Who's who in elite society? Oof. That sounds to me like actual fascist talking points. That's what Charlie Kirk said in response.
It's so needed to talk about what's happening in our schools. I just love you sending that diploma back to Harvard. Look, the part of the ruling class's power over the muscular class.
The muscular class. My friends, there are layers upon layers upon layers of fascist bullfuckery within that rhetoric. He's not calling to the working class, he's calling to Christians who are banded together through the Seven Mountains Mandate ideology, and he has essentially invented a language that is pro-Christian nationalist through a sense of false consciousness. And this is also important to understand when it comes to dissecting particularly fascist ideologies, is that they sometimes weaponize class analysis in order to push onto their hateful agenda of marginalized people. And that is how you get like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and anti-woke like hatred and all this shit. It just becomes that basically. This is just regular old-fashioned us and them talking points, right? That's all this is, because this is what fascists use in order to scapegoat other people. That's all this is. Typical us and them mentality. And it drums up people's emotions very, very deep and personal, and it sort of like internalizes their nationalism and weaponizes that to drive anger and violence.
And over working people is this credentialocracy, is the ability to be able to say you're not allowed to weigh in on certain topics or issues because you do not have a specific piece of paper. And you just kind of tear it up. You're like, you know what, I don't want that. And that was actually one of the brilliant approaches by Donald Trump. He went to all their schools. He went to all their cocktail parties. He was one of them, and he defected from there. So I love it, Pete. It's about time that we start to embrace wisdom, embrace prudence, and proper American history, not just a piece of paper from Cambridge, Yale, or Stanford.
The problem is that if that's how they view education, then what's the difference between that and whatever they're proposing? Because at the end of the day, all that they are proposing, other than a worthless piece of paper from Turning Point Academy, is just their own Christian nationalist brainwashing.
That's exactly right. Real liberated mind, free thinkers for the next generation. And Charlie, I love this because Turning Point is doing something about it. For 10 years, you've been building a movement. Now you're building schools. Tell our audience about it.
In a time where education routinely gets defunded, they are privatizing schools. Christian schools. Christian brainwashing schools. Of course, this isn't new, but this is part of the problem right here.
10 years we've been in the education space, starting high school chapters and college chapters. But as you articulate in your book, we need to start building new things. And that's what we're doing at Turning Point Academy. We're starting with one school right now in Phoenix, Arizona, with our amazing collaborators in collaboration with Dream City Christian School here in Phoenix. We're going to announce 2 more schools coming up this fall and maybe even more beyond that. It's about time that we start to build our own institutions, brick and mortar academies around classic American history, around the proper understanding of what is Western civilization, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. So this is a natural next step for what we're doing at Turning Point USA as an above all approach to be able to educate the next generation on why we're the greatest nation ever to exist in the history of the world. But it goes to something that we talked about previously in the week, Pete, which is we need to build new things. It's not enough just to take kids out of school or to complain. We got to build alternatives and solutions.
It is plain and simple. These goddamn Christian fucks want to monopolize child development, and they want to have a stronghold on every aspect of society, and that they are trying to influence all aspects of society. All aspects, education, entertainment, all parts of society. Emphasis on family, emphasis on maintaining a stronghold on the state. And you know, specifically with Charlie Kirk and most of these other churchgoer fucks, all these people want to use our taxpayer dollars to fund their schools. That's the bullshit part here, that they're trying to use our money and blur the line of separation of church and state. Don't believe me? No, you don't understand. We actually have some people whom you ought to be paying attention to right now. You'll see, my friends. These are American fascist tactics. And I want you to consider something. Now, we do have to keep in mind that most of these people that I just mentioned so far, they're private property owners, right? Like they have vacation homes and planes and mansions and super churches. You know, you can look at the Joel Osteen bullshit with keeping hurricane victims out of his churches when people need shelter. That's a real fucking doozy right there. But these are just private citizens, right? Like, yeah, they're very powerful private citizens with a lot of social and political influence, but they're still private citizens. What about people who are in politics specifically right now? You see, these people in particular have political influence and political seating. So they can be the law. They can create the law. They can make police enforce whatever laws that they somehow agree upon within the seats of Congress. So everything that we heard before can be best understood as very powerful and wealthy, influential people pretty much doing wishful thinking with their lobbying. Whereas this next bit right here are particularly people who have the political power to change the system, to reform it. And if these particular politicians are Christian nationalists or Christian fascists in any way, that means they can strongly influence how our country is run. But there's none of that, right? Right? The next section is going to be called Tweedledee, Tweedledumbass, because these two people are high-ranking dumbasses, and I think that is the perfect way to introduce both of them. Let's start with Lauren Boebert, because much more importantly, she is a House of Representatives seat holder of the 3rd District of Colorado, and she's had this position since 2021. Lauren Boebert is extremely against abortion. So against abortion that her son, who is too young to be having a child, had sex and got somebody pregnant, and then she used that son as a political prop.
But I leaned over and I asked my husband if it was appropriate to announce this here today. So I'm going to tell you all for the first time in a public setting that not only am I a mom of 4 boys, but come April, I will be a Gigi to a brand new grandson. And Jason and I are so excited to welcome this new life into our family. Now, any of you who have young children who are giving life there are some questions that pop up. There's some fear that arises. Now, my son, when I approached him and told him, Tyler, I'm going to be a 36-year-old grandmother, he said, well, didn't you make Granny a 36-year-old granny? I said, yes, I did. He said, well, then it's hereditary. Nice try, buddy.
What the fuck, dog? Would it also surprise you that she is against same-sex marriage? She is against the LGBT community. She is against the Equality Act, calling it a supremacy for gays. She's also, ironically, for being a Seven Mountains mandate supporter, also against a lot of actual government mandates that would help people sometimes, like the mask mandate during the height of the COVID pandemic. She's also pro-border. She's also very much against making healthcare accessible, let alone affordable. If you're not already convinced that this girl is fucking batshit insane, let me tell you about what her thoughts are on the National Defense Authorization Act. A lot of activists would say that the NDAA strips people of their rights even further, because it means our taxes are specifically going to the militarization of our government. So would it surprise you at all that Lauren Boebert would call the NDAA, of all things, woke agenda? Well, in 2022, that is exactly what she did. And before I continue, in case it needs to be said, yeah, no, like, the NDAA is not quote-unquote woke agenda. Come on now. This is an article from her website where she called this bill a woke defense bill, and she went on to say, quote, the first version of the NDAA, which passed in the House in September 23, was a leftist wish list full of provisions that distract from national security and readiness. This version of the bill included provisions to draft our daughters, implement red flag laws, create a mandatory $15 minimum wage for Department of Defense contractors, and establish an Office of Counter-Extremism within the military. Especially harmful to the 3rd Congressional District, the NDAA even included Representative Diane DeGette Wilderness and Representative Joe Negus's Core Acts, as well as several other public lands bills, even though they have nothing to do with national defense and aim to lock up significantly more land in Colorado. I voted against this version of the bill. I am for funding our military, but the bad outweighed the good in the original House version of the bill, and I could not, in good conscience, support legislation that would ultimately ruin our military with woke policies. End quote. Holy shit. Keep in mind that this particular amendment to the NDAA just has to do with including women into the selective services, which is something that men have to go through, and this would make women go through it too. And it's just so crazy to me that she is even misogynistic on a liberal level, which is so fucking disgusting. I mean, even liberals can see from a mile away that she is a hyper fucking fascist. So entrenched into the trad wife culture. But she has political influence. Maybe not for long. I haven't even gotten into the whole Beetlejuice theater situation, which, I don't know, I feel like that would be reaching for low-hanging fruit. I'm sorry. That joke was just sitting right in front of me. I couldn't not reach for it. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'll see myself out now. Let's move on. In addition to all of this, we have your Christian nationalist beliefs, and thanks to Al Jazeera, who has, as of recording this right now, has recently had their offices raided by the IDF. What the fuck? Yeah, so they have also provided this next clip that you're about to hear about Lauren Boebert's views on Israel. Take a listen.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the U.S. relationship with Israel?
There have been two nations created to glorify God, Israel and the United States of America. I will bless both. I will honor both. I will do all I can to stand and defend them.
Only two nations are glorified by God. Are you fucking kidding me? The only reason why Israel is on this list is because it is friends with the United States, and the United States is helping Israel commit a genocide in Palestine and now in Lebanon as well. I was right about how Israel is using hyper-expansive policies to just push everything forward, and the Christian evangelical movement is only accelerating that even further here in the United States, and especially in seats of power, which, by the way, of course, it needs to be said that Lauren Boebert is an evangelical Christian. But she's not just an evangelical Christian. That would make things a little too easy. She's also a Christian Zionist. Because that's the thing, folks, is that the majority of people who actually support Israel are Christian evangelicals. Contrary to popular beliefs, it's not the majority of Jews that support Israel. In fact, the conception of Israel is accelerated by Christian Israel lobbies like AIPAC, because what they do is that they actually fundraise for candidates in particular that make it into political office, and that they can fundraise or influence the government in some way to help Israel even further. So all this is a deeply, deeply corrupt system, and Lauren Boebert is a small part of that huge, deep corruption. Notice her allegiance to fighting for Israel and to the people of her district. Well, sorry to the people of her district, but she abandoned you, and now she's in the 4th district of Colorado. So that's not good. So while she is doing some very, actually inappropriate behavior at a movie theater with a bunch of kids in it with her date, she's also hyper influential in Christian nationalist bullshit. And that, my friends, is my biggest concern, is that she actually has political power, unlike the other people who are just lobbyists and filibuster actors and shit like that. No, she actually is this psychotic, but she also has political power. Tweedledee, Tweedledum, she is not the only one. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who not only blamed the California wildfires on what she described as Jewish space lasers, but also as another congresswoman who has a seat in political power, she also has some very specific ideas as to what she believes the Republican Party should be. Take a listen.
Oh, wow. That's a tough question, because there's a lot of things that should be. I think Republicans really need to recognize the people they represent. Okay, their voters, not the lobbyist donors, not the corporate PACs, not those people. That's not who the Republican Party should represent. We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian, and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists. And when Republicans learn to represent most of the people that vote for them, then we will be the party that continues to grow without having to chase down certain identities or chase down, certain segments of people. We just need to represent Americans, and most Americans, no matter how they vote, really care about the same things. And I want to see Republicans actually do their job. That's
Absolutely.
What I want to see.
It'd be crazy, right? First time in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, we might continue to hold power.
Might have a heart attack. Woo.
Yeah.
I think that just spells it out right there for you, what kind of person she is. She is hyper anti-Semitic, as you just heard, and she is also extremely pro-Christian nationalism. She is also hyper fixated on Hunter Biden's genitals.
I would like to present this to the committee. This is showing Hunter Biden paying for a victim's United flight from LA to Dulles. I believe this is a violation of the Mann Act. This is Hunter this is his proof that he bought the ticket. He bought it for this woman right here. He flew her from Los Angeles to Washington on June 14th, flew her back to Los Angeles, California on June 15th of 2018. So when Hunter Biden paid for this woman to do this with him, to travel across state lines from California to Washington, D.C. on June 15th. This is a violation of the Mann Act. This was prostitution.
What the fuck? Oh my god, dude. Like, you gotta understand that she is showing images while she is saying all of this on a big poster board that she's printed out herself of, like, Hunter Biden and his sexual partner engaging in sex for, you know, essentially what is sex work. That's what it is. She's getting on his case for hiring a sex worker, which I don't necessarily think that's the biggest dirt you can put on the Biden administration or the Biden family for that matter. Like, come on, I've done videos on Biden alone, and like, he's a horrible person as is. You don't need to do this. This is stupid. Hey, speaking of things that you don't have to fucking do, we can look at Mike Johnson, and he actually is also a member of Congress, actually a House Speaker, and also in particular, both him and his son monitor each other's porn usage, which is extremely creepy and a dynamic that I would never say yes to. Are you fucking kidding me?
So Covenant Eyes is the software that we've been using a long time in our household. I first learned about it at, I think, a Promise Keepers event in the early 2000s. I think it was developed in about the year 2000. But it's the largest accountability software that there is, and there's some paperwork out there on the table that I think everybody may have picked up on the way in. If not, go get it. It's a subscription-based, I mean, we don't make any money on this. I'm telling you, we use it. Okay, I'm endorsing it because I'm a user. It's about $15 a month, $16 a month, something like that. And you get up to 10 devices. And what it is, it's accountability software. So men in a church, men's Bible study groups will do it. That's how it's presented at Promise Keepers. But they also mention, hey, when your kids become teenagers, especially if you have boys, dads, they're talking to the guys at this event, you might want to think about doing this with your sons. And so we've been doing that. And so what it does real simply is it has an algorithm and software. It's way above my head how it works, but it scans, you obviously opt into it, but it scans all the activity on your phone or your devices, your laptop, tablet, what have you. We do all of it. And then it sends a report to your accountability partner. So my accountability partner right now is Jack, my son, right? And so he's 17. So he and I get a report of all the things that are on our phones or all of our devices once a week. If anything objectionable comes up, your accountability partner gets an immediate notice. I'm proud to tell you my son he's got a clean slate.
Stop being so creepy. All of these Christians are so fucking creepy. And have you noticed anything as all 2 hours of me talking about this horrible bullshit, have you noticed anything yet? And that is in particular that all of these people have either some form of social influence as propagated by the Seven Mountains Mandate ideology, or they are in seats of political power to further accelerate those policies, and they're solidifying power within the government and stripping all of the resources that would interfere with their monopoly on society. And what they are doing is they are weaponizing American nationalism with the Christian faith. And it's like, this is where they actually begin to talk about the identity of what a Christian nationalist is, and they're trying to make that more mainstream, more socially acceptable. We went from some fringe pastor to like a cartoon animator to a TV host on Fox News to a bigger pastor with some connections to people who are organizing with Congress. And then there are those pastors who are already in Congress. And then there are some Christian nationalist fuckers who are already in Congress. And then there are some that are actually speakers of Congress. What if it becomes the vice presidential nominee of the Republican Party? I am referring to none other than couchfucker J.D. Vance. Yeah, he's a really horrible person because he believes that people who don't have children shouldn't have as much of a vote in the democratic system as people who do have children, and he wants you to utilize your children as votes. So he's essentially saying that you need to hyper necessitate having children in order to build a national identity. Yeah, he's that level of sick in the fucking head, dude. He also has claimed that parents of children should get more votes and control the votes of the children, despite the fact that nobody is really calling for children to be able to vote. You know what, though, and I do realize that I'm speaking somewhat anecdotally here, I have experienced a lot of education growing up centered around the topic of voting, the importance of voting, and being involved in our electoral system. However, I think what's also interesting as well is that while we're not advocating for children to go actually vote into the democratic process, our ruling class is advocating pretty staunchly for child labor and child marriages. Think about it. It is quite problematic that only 13 states, as of June 2024, have banned underage marriages with no exception. It is also quite telling that the Child Labor Amendment of 1924 through 1934 was only 100 years ago, quite literally, and we're now looking at a time to where states like Arkansas and West Virginia are relaxing their child labor laws. And we're also looking at a time to where states like South Carolina, Florida, and Texas, they all have anti-abortion laws that prohibit abortion under the rule of law, even in cases of rape and incest. A friend of mine would tell me to describe this kind of political behavior as Alabama cunnilingus. Those are, to be precise, his words and not mine. J.D. Vance has also claimed that childless people do not contribute to society, as if reproduction and raising children was the only way for children to contribute to society. And I mean, he is an extreme nationalist, like, holy shit, dog. He is also a corporate puppet for Peter Thiel, a venture capitalist and the founder of PayPal. Peter Thiel also himself said that modern Christianity is too focused on victims, which, wow, it sounds like they just don't give a fuck about the people who they kill. That sounds genocidal. It is a genocidal, movement after all, because J.D. Vance also recently been peddling the myth about Haitian migrants eating people's pets in Springfield, Ohio. A myth that he picked from a literal neo-Nazi group called the Blood Tribe, who made threats in Springfield, Ohio. Take a listen.
I'm sure the Honorable Mr. Rob Rue recognizes me, considering he supposedly knew of our action before we even arrived.
He's a literal Nazi. He marched with swastikas.
First of all, I would like to dispel the myth that you knew of our march and intentionally had no reaction or made no forewarning about it as a preventative measure. You had no more idea than the police officers or Haitians. And it's frankly insulting to our organization to make such a claim. Second, I've come to bring a word of warning. Stop what you're doing before it's too late. Crime and savagery will only increase with every Haitian you bring in. And with it, public frustration and anger.
You sound threatening to me.
Based on the comments
if I could ask the police to go ahead.
I'm sure I don't need to tell you that.
Just sound threatening if you go ahead and just peacefully be removed.
These people didn't ask for this. And they deserve better than to have to put up with violent, unruly outsiders.
You're done. Thank you. That's all. Thank you so much. Not really, thank you. But
so yeah, J.D. Vance just kind of took a neo-Nazi's word for it. Because on Twitter, and no, I will not refer to as the other one, he said, quote, "Months ago, I raised the issue of Haitian illegal immigrants draining social services and generally causing chaos all over Springfield, Ohio. Reports now show that people have had their pets abducted and eaten by people who shouldn't be in this country. Where is our border czar? End quote. First of all, if you're talking about Kamala Harris, I mean, I'm not going to get into it this video. I will do it in a future episode of this podcast. But she is really hardcore when it comes to border policy. So don't even fucking go there. And secondly, he knows what he is doing is drumming up more violence against Haitian people because he doesn't cite any sources. He just says reports. No, a neo-Nazi just was racist and decided to be racist publicly. And then he decided to speak right after that happened. I mean, honestly, all he did was just make the place more hostile and unsafe. And he does not like that people, particularly Haitians, getting access to social services when really Haitians are what makes the community, the community. It is a really shitty divide and conquer tactic that he is trying to use here, and it's drumming up old-fashioned style racism into the contemporary of 2024. And I don't know if he just does not understand how absolutely fucking dangerous that is, that he is just doing this, and doing so on a very high-profile platform that he's on, because, again, just to remind you, he's the vice president nominee for the Republican Party. And not to mention that, of course, like Donald Trump, yeah, he's parroted all of this too. So, does J.D. Vance know, or does he even want to admit that he made up a bunch of bullshit to divide and conquer? Well, guess what? He actually did, and I gotta show you this. This is really, really fucking good. Take a listen.
Just once and for all, you again started this in part by saying that, at which Donald Trump repeated on the debate stage, that, and he didn't say anything about the policies that you're talking about. He just said Haitians are eating dogs and cats. Can you affirmatively say now that that is a rumor that has no basis with evidence?
Dana, the evidence is the first-hand account of my constituents who are telling me that this happened. And by the way, I've been trying to talk about the problems in Springfield for months, and the American media ignored it. There was a congressional hearing just last week of angel moms who lost children because Kamala Harris let criminal migrants into this country who then murdered their children. The American media totally ignored this stuff until Donald Trump and I started talking about cat memes. If I have to,
but it wasn't just a meme,
create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do, Dana, because you guys are completely letting Kamala Harris coast. You had one interview with her.
You just heard something that is a very dangerous problem right now. And I mean, it is a super dangerous problem. He is running to become the vice president of the United States, next to Donald Trump, who already has Project 2025 planned with him, even though Donald Trump is trying very hard to downplay his relationship with all of these broader parts of the political system that is all tied together through the Seven Mountains Mandate. But J.D. Vance has just admitted that he listens to the neo-Nazis of Springfield, Ohio, or maybe they're not even from Springfield, Ohio. Maybe they're from like the outer edges of like the community or something. Either way, this has only further terrorized Springfield, Ohio, as Haitians in the area are being harassed openly in town. Those constituents that he is saying is his evidence could very well have been the same guy who made that open threat about Haitian migrants in the city hall meeting. And J.D. Vance has just admitted that he listens to them, to his constituents, which should further inform you on all of J.D. Vance's political views for the most part. Yeah, he listens to Nazis, he's a white supremacist, he is hyper-patriarchal, and essentializes children in his ideology. He is fucking weird. And now, this is where we tie everything that we discussed into a nice, neat bow. As I obviously didn't go to every single little controversy all of these fucking goddamn freaks within the Christian cult have entailed. Of course, I have not gone through all of it, and I won't be able to go through all of it, because that would take fucking goddamn forever. But the one thing that we need to keep in mind is that they're all connected through what is called the fellowship. Also known as the Fellowship Association, also known as the family. And the family, for short, the purpose of this group utilizes decision makers, particularly political leaders like the ones we've been talking about, and engaging them in prayer meetings and Bible studies and all kinds of little retreats for decision makers to engage in to talk about the future of policy making. And what's important about this is that it best serves the white evangelical sector of Christianity. This is not just some regular Bible study group. This has had really influential and powerful people, including every single U.S. sitting president, all the way back to Eisenhower. Yes, even Eisenhower was involved in the family. Specifically, the National Prayer Breakfast is a series of meals, being breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It is routinely hosted by members of the United States Congress, which, if you've learned anything from this episode, you know that that is an alarm bell. Maybe you at home are listening to this and thinking to yourself, no, there's no way that, like, a Democrat would go up onto this kind of cultish evangelical behavior. But no, actually, here's Barack Obama involved in the National Prayer Breakfast. And for the record, this goes back to the year of 2012. Take a listen.
It is good to be with so many friends united in prayer. And I begin by giving all praise and honor to God for bringing us together here today. I want to thank our co-chairs, Mark and Jeff, to my dear friend, the guy who always has my back, Vice President Biden, all the members of Congress. This is my third year coming to this prayer breakfast as president. As Jeff mentioned, before that I came as senator. I have to say it's easier coming as president. I don't have to get here quite as early.
This is to say that both Democrats and Republicans within the political spectrum of the United States empire both serve the same damn agenda. And sometimes you don't necessarily need to look that far from what the white evangelical crackerjacks are up to find that out for yourself. But Barack Obama, of course, is not the only president who has actually spoken and attended the National Prayer Breakfast of the family. Yeah, actually Donald Trump has as well. And particularly Donald Trump decided to rewrite history when it comes to spiritual warfare. This goes back to 2020 during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Take a listen.
Our nation's long march for civil rights was inspired, sustained, and uplifted by faith, prayer, and devotion of religious believers. To protect faith communities, I have taken historic action to defend religious liberty, including the constitutional right to pray in public schools.
What these people are cheering for is a made-up issue that Donald Trump has just perpetuated over and over again. It is not illegal to pray in a public school, or even in public for that matter. However, it is illegal for teachers and staffers to force children to pray to their God, to force religion down students' throats. And that is what they were just clapping for 30 fucking seconds for. It just blows my mind that back in the 1950s, they were using this exact tactic to try and scaremonger Christian fucking psychos into thinking that they're outlawing Christianity. Can you imagine if that was the reality? If that was actually something that Christians were going through today? Christians love to play with the persecution complex, but the Jews actually have centuries of actual real persecution. Even in spite of what I've learned about Israel through the past decade, I want to say that I've gained even more respect for Jews, and I've gained even less respect for Christianity. Because Jews actually fight for freedom, historically speaking, whether it be 1,000 years ago, throughout the centuries of pogroms that they've experienced, or within the anti-Semitism that they currently exist both in Europe and in the United States. Whereas Christians, oh my god, Christians have like the Cathars who were also killed by other Christians, and the Diggers who were killed by other Christians. Probably the closest thing we have to an actual Christian genocide was back in 1915 when the Turkish government went after the Armenian and Assyrian people who were predominantly Christian. And due to the pressing issue of the Armenian genocide, I'm just going to state for the record that that is not to be minimized at all. The Armenian genocide did in fact happen, and it nearly wiped out 3/4 of the Armenian population. So I'm not trying to minimize that at all. That's a real thing that happened. But when it comes to like white American evangelical Christian fucking goddamn pieces of shit who are experiencing some kind of persecution, yeah, they have like a goddamn persecution, what I would call a complex. They play a fucking role of being persecuted whenever they are questioned, whenever their psychotic fucking batshit insane belief system infringes upon the rights of other people's basic human rights. At the beginning of this episode, I said that, yeah, people are kind of put off by Christianity. And that is because when you tell somebody that you're a Christian, they don't think of like a progressive Jesus Christ who fought against the Roman Empire and helped the poor and the vulnerable. No, they think of like these crazy fucking crackers who do some kind of charity work with strings attached with very, very deep-seated malicious intent. And then when I hear about so-called Christian leftists, like Christian socialists or Christian communists or Christian anarchists, so on and so forth, what I think about is how much they serve the ruling class, right? Their class analysis is so fucking backwards. They worship one fucking man who is dead and is not doing anything right fucking now. It's also my criticism of those who worship John Brown. Yeah, John Brown's great. Yeah, Jesus is great. But what are you doing to perpetuate the will of their activism and sacrifices that they have made in the present time? And quite frankly, I don't see much of that. Because either you need to do something that is so drastic that it redefines what it means to be a Christian in goddamn America, or you need to completely work to subvert the entirety of the Christian movement in every single way possible. And frankly, since I am seeing Christian leftists doing goddamn neither, the problem is that we're not really seeing Christian leftists using actual praxis to combat Project 2025 or Ziklag or the Seven Mountains Mandate or the family, the fellowship, the New Apostolic Reformation. These are a network of hyper-fascist, right-wing, evangelical Christian bullshit. And I want to be clear that the problem is not that they're not aware of this stuff. The problem is that their praxis doesn't really reciprocate in anything that subverts these particular parts of the evangelical sector. Even Damon Garcia, who calls himself a Christian communist, he himself has done a whole video on the family, for example. And to his credit, it's a pretty decent video, but I want to steer your attention to Jews and how they've been responding to the Israeli campaign to kill Palestinians, and now, as of recently, setting their eyes on attacking Lebanon. And of course, just like with Palestine, Israel has bombed Lebanon several times throughout history for decades. But that is the thing here, folks, is that Jews actually have fought back. There are Jews in the United States and in Germany who are protesting their government's non-stop support for this genocide going on in Palestine and in Lebanon. and these Jews routinely get arrested. On December 15, 2023, in Los Angeles, where I'm from, and on my birthday, Jewish activists went out of their way to block the 110 freeway to force people to pay attention to what's going on in Palestine. Jews, just like Jesus, have been risking their fucking lives. But I don't see that with Christians. Instead, what I do see is a fucking pitiful cult with a few outliers who kind of just have like a club meeting every once in a while. Hey, just some actual advice from a former Christian like myself. Hey, if you want to be Christ-like, be Jewish, not Christian. Christianity was invented way after Jesus passed away, and it was distorted by kings and rulers over time up until present day. So this is only the natural conclusion of what Christianity is supposed to be. Enter Russell Moore, a former top official for the Southern Baptist Convention, which, by the way, fuck the Southern Baptist Convention, but I digress. Because according to NPR, he had some really interesting things to say about not just himself, but also other pastors and their experiences and how their sermons were received as of recently. Quote, "It was the result of having multiple pastors tell me essentially the same story about quoting the Sermon on the Mount, parenthetically, in their preaching, turn the other cheek, and to have someone come after to say, where did you get those liberal talking points? And what was alarming to me is that in most of these scenarios, when the pastor would say, I'm literally quoting Jesus Christ, the response would not be, I apologize. The response would be, yes, but that doesn't work anymore. That's weak. And when we get to the point to where the teachings of Jesus himself are seen as subversive to us, then we're in a crisis," end quote. As I've stated before, I don't quite agree that Christianity is necessarily in crisis. What I believe is that this conclusion that we've arrived to in a cultural Christian revolution that's going to end in a fascist dictatorship if Donald Trump wins, or if some other Republican or conservative that is sympathetic to the Seven Mountains Mandate ideology wins in a future election, yeah, I believe that is the natural conclusion of what Christianity has led us towards, this really fucking evil future. Because again, if you really want to be Christ-like, if you want to live the life that Jesus lived, and if you really want to espouse the views and beliefs that Jesus preached, internalized, and cherished, then instead you would be Jewish, not Christian. There's, in my opinion, no reason whatsoever for an abolition of the Christian religion. I believe the Christian religion should not even exist, period. And I can already see some fucking devil's advocate waddling themselves into the comment section telling me that members of the Global South have Christian communities. Who do you think installed the Global South with Christianity? It didn't just happen in a vacuum. Colonialism played a part in that. Christianity has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. Christianity is a crackerjack cult. There is also really something interesting to say about Donald Trump being the idol of this movement. Now keep in mind that he is not the leader of this whole movement. He is a figurehead, and he is being crowned king in this dynamic. Donald Trump's ties to all of these aspects of the Christian far right and far right more broadly, even though he is not the mastermind behind it, him being a symptom and the beneficiary of all of it, he still plays an important role in bringing these different factions together behind him. He is the chosen emperor king of the white nationalist clan, but the real minds behind the movement were already in positions of power in the state long before Donald Trump showed up for the scene. The church and in the media, he still takes advantage of this movement and capitalizes on every single ounce of it, even though he himself is not a Christian, in order to claim power for himself. Donald Trump is considered by the Christian far right as a modern-day King Cyrus. King Cyrus was a Persian king in biblical times who aided the Israelites. And when modern Christian fascist goddamn freaks call Donald Trump by that title, like, a king, they mean that they do recognize that he is not a Christian like them, but he will nevertheless still help them achieve their goals in Christian supremacy. Now listen, about Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mike Johnson and all of these other political fuckwads who blur the line between church and state, they utilize the Seven Mountains Mandate in their ideology to shape this kind of government. For example, Lauren Boebert criticized the regulations that restrict the church from having a closer grip on the government itself, and she calls for a blurring of the lines between separation of church and state. In fact, she actually goes as far as to admit that outright. Take a listen.
The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
And keep in mind, too, that she is a sitting member of U.S. Congress, and she believes in a super supremacist viewpoint. She just flat out told you that the church should be the one that guides our government. That's a theocracy. Remember at the beginning of the episode when I told you that if somebody tells you that they are a fascist, or if somebody tells you that they are a Nazi, that you are to believe them? Well, this is Lauren Boebert expressing her hyper-fascist views plain as fucking day. And given that she is a Christian far-right evangelical sitting member of Congress, she is also, as you may have guessed, participating in the family, the fellowship. So Douglas Coe, who is one of the leaders of the fellowship, once described a crazy fucking act by what is allegedly the Chinese Communist Party and the gangs of Los Angeles back in, of course, 1989, which is the height of the war on drugs, and of course the steady boiling point for the Cold War and the Red Scare in the United States of America. But he uses this description of violence to describe what should be done in the name of Jesus Christ, which is really fucking messed up. But I mean, hey, you're already here. Take a listen.
I've seen pictures of the young men in the Red Guard, 22 years old in China. A table laid out like a butcher table. They would bring in this young man's mother and father, lay her on the table with a basket on the end. He would take an axe and cut her head off. They have to put the purposes of the Red Guard ahead of their father, mother, brother, sister, and their own life. That was a covenant, a pledge. That's what Jesus said. Today, in Los Angeles, in the gangs, you violate the code, you're dead. It's happening every day, today, in this country, this very day. Taken right from the Scripture. Jesus Christ said, if you do not put me before your father, your mother, and your brother, and your sister, you cannot be my disciple. If you're going to have any movement that moves men and nations, you have to have that kind of commitment. Jesus knew that. That's the way the social order is run. If you don't run it that way, the social order goes into disarray.
Or in other words, the maintenance of the status quo reinforced by a coercive hierarchy. So anyway, the fellowship began with Abraham Vierde, who was a Methodist clergyman and innovator and founded the organization in 1935 in opposition to Roosevelt's New Deal. A modern artist and former intern of the fellowship, Jeff Charlotte, described the establishment of the family as a reaction to the labor organizing of Harry Bridges, stating, quote, "The family really begins when the founder, Abraham in this case, has this vision, which he thinks comes from God, that Harry Bridges, this Australian labor organizer who organized really the biggest strike in American history, a very successful strike, is a satanic and Soviet agent, end quote. That quote came from a 2008 article by the Sydney Morning Herald. It gets even deeper though, because Jeff Charlotte describes in an NBC News report that members of the fellowship are indoctrinated into admiring strong men like Hitler and other dictators of being potential conduits for God's will. Jeff Charlotte would say, quote, "We were being taught the leadership lessons of Hitler, Lenin, and Mao, and that Hitler's genocide wasn't really an issue for them, it was the strength that he emulated," end quote. And that's the real important thing here, is that when they are supporting Israel and its expansionist, imperialist, genocidal campaign, they're not really doing so to fight anti-Semitism, as they say. Of course, it is because they want to kill Arabs and, of course, in the Christian Zionist views, to kill the Jews for when the second coming or the rapture takes place. This is important to understand because they believe in a God that sides with the strong and not the weak. And so they want to enforce this at every level of society. Thus is the Seven Mountains Mandate once again. They adhere to what has been dubbed as elitist fundamentalism, which is the fetishization of wealth and power itself, the rapid opposition to labor movements and worker power, and it teaches that laissez-faire capitalism is God's will itself. They believe in instant forgiveness, which basically is for the powerful men who commit great atrocities, like Catholic priests who molest children at an alarming rate, war criminals like Benjamin Netanyahu, or people like in our Congress or our presidents who have been at these national prayer breakfasts. That is why this allegiance, including with Barack Obama, is quite harmful, because they don't see themselves as people who need to be held accountable while they are committing these war crimes, because they are part of this elitist allegiance. So then what does Christianity as a whole believe in? It's not just something that we can summarize as a following to Jesus Christ, because every time we use this, we instantly recognize that it is a weapon, a tool, a rhetorical device for Christian fascists and Christian nationalists to accelerate something much greater than just that. And they know it too. They know what they're doing here. Well, you see, these crazy fucking people, they believe that the white Aryan race, like Celtic, Germanics, Scandinavian, or Nordic peoples, are the true descendants of the ancient Israelites, and that therefore the true God's chosen people, quote unquote, despite the fact that the Palestinian people are factually the ancient Israelite descendants that had the majority of them convert to Christianity and Islam later in history, they believe that all non-white and non-Aryan people of the world have no human souls. No, seriously, like, they believe that non-white people are like a separate and lesser inferior species of like animal, as opposed to the white race. And the thing is that this ultimately concludes into Christians ultimately upholding specifically white supremacist views. So they advocate for segregation and the intolerance and abolition of interracial marriages. That's why the J.D. Vance Haitian dog and cat scare, although while that is absolutely stupid and silly and baseless, it's part of this repeated white supremacist violence that is just a fundamental part of American history, which is the problem. We're supposed to be learning lessons to prevent that kind of behavior from happening again, not trying to reinforce it as a state order with a bunch of connected lobbying groups and coalitions and religious cults. Speaking of their anti-Semitic views, they believe that Jews are the literal children of demons and what they call the serpent seed myth. And it's the idea that Jews are descendants of Cain, the first murderer. And these fucking crazy ass Christian motherfuckers believe that Jews are just naturally evil people. And this crazy anti-Semitic myth that has been around for a long ass time, that is enough to strip them of being called God's chosen people. As a Christian supremacist movement, they also seek to enforce a state of quote-unquote racial purity through the establishment of a white ethno-state, although they do not trust the current government to do this, as they believe it is to be controlled by Jews, again feeding into yet another anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. They believe that the only way to establish their desired ethno-state is through the use of force and violence. Do you remember that one clip from earlier that Andrew Womack said?
And I've actually had people say that if Trump was to be elected, if we got a conservative Congress, that they fear that we would have another civil war. And you know what? I don't want a civil war. I don't know anybody that does. But would it be worth it to turn this nation back? I believe it would.
Why would anybody with a sound mind wage a civil war against its own people, let alone the people that it shares a planet with? But if we're talking nationalistically here, then yeah, why would you wage a war within your own country if it wasn't for that you only wanted to consolidate power yourself? And that, of course, given that this is a Christian nationalist movement, specifically with the goal of reigning supreme and making Christianity the state religion of the United States through a theocratic fascist dictatorship, yeah, I perceive this as a threat to the very existence of democracy in the first place, and I won't be listening to some Christian leftist telling me to tone it down when they have so many skeletons in their closet that it could actually weigh the entire history of violence committed by Christian nutjobbery. But that's the thing, folks, is that the Christian movement is experiencing what I would identify not as a moral crisis, because I don't think Christians are moral at all. I think Christians are fucking backwards beyond all goddamn belief here. I believe they're going through an actual identity crisis. Because you see, the Christian identity movement has been documented as far back as the 1920s in the US empire. But it first originated from an ideology from Great Britain called British Israelism, also called Anglo-Israelism, which is pretty white supremacist sounding if you ask me, because it dates back to the 1600s. Yeah, this shit has been brewing for a long time. I mean, like, this level of white supremacy, this is old school white supremacy. I mean, it goes real old school. And it claims that the Anglo-Saxon race, being the British, were descendants of the ancient Israelites based on pseudo-scientific and pseudo-historical evidence. And thus, the Christian identity movement branched away from British Israelism due to differences in the opinions on Jewish people, specifically Jewish people, whereas British Israelism was predominantly Philo-Semitic, seeing the Jewish people in Britain, specifically white Jews, as still being descendants of the Israelites. So you can now understand that the modern evangelical movement and the Christian identity movement overall has sprung because they can't agree on as to whether or not Jews are worthy people in the first place. They hate Jews. It's an anti-Semitic movement. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. And thus the American Christian identity movement evolved into its current anti-Semitic extremist position as anti-Semitism in general was increasing at the time. So they literally believe that only white people are human, specifically white Protestant evangelical people. And Jewish people, to them, are literal spawns of Satan. And they believe that they need to establish a Nazi-style ethno-state. The Christian identity movement, the Seven Mountains Mandate, And all of the rest of this shit is deeply connected to the evangelical death cult. The Catholic Church wishes it could be this successful in its conquest and influence. And I say this as a former Catholic that wishes to abolish the Catholic Church as it exists today. I am a church abolitionist, for the record, because the evangelicals only needed a couple centuries to do all of this bullshit compared to the Catholics who have been doing this for 1500 years and only have like one country, which is the Vatican, that maintains the Holy See. And like, what's that worth? It's a goddamn golden seat that an old white man sits on. But keep this in mind, that evangelicalism lends itself to this ideology extremely well, given that, as stated in my Fatima video, the sole purpose of this sect of establishment is to specifically oppose equality and freedom to newly freed slaves in America, and subsequently every other people group striving for their own freedom. It is expressly a tool for opposition by the established oppressor in-group against the established oppressed out-group. Like for slavery, it was white slave masters who were quote-unquote inconvenienced after the loss of the Civil War, and I'm referring to the First Civil War, and co-opting the spiritual practices and beliefs of their newly freed slaves in order to subvert it to their own ends. Notice something familiar here, and that is, once again, Christianity and God and Jesus are being weaponized to subvert people who are fighting for their freedom. We saw a great example of this with Sean Feucht in 2020. Yep, we're getting back to him, because during the Black Lives Matter protests after the extrajudicial murder of George Floyd, Sean Feucht would set up stages nearby the protest and invite people to walk away from the protest and instead come to give themselves to God, using emotional and religious manipulation to get activists to turn away from their work and to castrate the momentum of the protests themselves. These quote-unquote riots to revival, as Sean calls them, serve to basically offer a sentimental and feckless alternative to actually fighting for social justice. And that's the thing, evangelicalism is religious white supremacy, and it defends white supremacy. Speaking of supremacy, this is Sean Feucht advocating openly for the genocide of Palestinian lives while also being in full endorsement of Israel's ongoing genocide. Take a listen.
Yes, these are the end days. I know people say all the time, everyone's saying it's the end days. Jesus said it was the end days 2,000 years ago. Well, it is the end days, and we're one day closer to the return of Jesus. And as that ramps up, we're going to see a rise of evil. We're going to see a rise of glory, and we're going to see a rise of hatred for the Jewish people. And I think right now in America, I would have never imagined we would be at a place where university students in state-funded schools would be marching across their campuses, shouting death to Israel, death to America, burn Tel Aviv to the ground. I mean, it is unbelievable what we're seeing. Scenes like this that haven't really been broadcasted since the 1930s. And history seems to be replaying itself. And so in light of that, as many of you know, we are gathering tomorrow night on the campus of Columbia University for a United for Israel march. And I have mobilized a few things in my day, but I have not seen the wind of God breathing on an event like I have this one. It is amazing. I feel like the Lord is setting us up.
Yeah, I have a few comments on that. One, if the Lord is setting you up, then you need to get the fuck out of there, because that is not a good sign. When somebody says that the Lord is setting you up, that does not sound trustworthy. Run. Secondly, notice how he says that there is going to be a rise in anti-Semitism. And of course, rhetorically speaking, he's referring to the pro-Palestinian protesters who are demanding for a ceasefire and to a halt to sending arms to Israel to go bomb Gaza and continue this genocide. But given what we have talked about when it comes to the Christian identity movement, how come it necessitates the rise of anti-Semitism? Why do we need the rise of anti-Semitism when we don't need to have anti-Semitism play a factor into this in the first place? We don't, just point blank here, we don't need anti-Semitism for any reason. We just don't need a hatred or bigotry of Jewish people. Regardless as to whether or not this person is intentionally advocating for more anti-Semitism, it doesn't matter here. Part of his plan, his master plan, is a rise of anti-Semitism. That's a contributing factor to the rise of evangelical Christian fascism. And lastly, he mentioned something about mobilizing people to Columbia University the day after. I do wonder how well that went. Let's take a listen.
You want to get beheaded. You want to get beheaded. You want to get beheaded. You like getting raped. You like getting beheaded. You like getting beheaded. You like getting beheaded. You like when babies' heads come off. You want to be raped. You want to get raped till your pulse breaks. You are a baby murder. You are a dumb fuck. You want to get murdered. You want to get raped. You want to get murdered. You want to get raped. You want to get murdered. Yes, that's what you're dancing to. Israel high! 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 Bring them home! 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 Bring them home!
And must I remind you that the IDF has killed more hostages that they were supposed to rescue than they have actually rescued. And not to mention, you have these people demanding that these protesters who are simply demanding an end to genocide, that they're gonna get raped and that they're gonna get killed and murdered. You hear what this sounds like. This is pure insanity. Because Christianity, particularly, is an apocalyptic death cult. It is the end times prophecies that these evangelicals are trying to force on all of us. They believe that if they allow Israel to reclaim the totality of their supposed original land, which includes all of Palestine and most of Egypt, it will trigger the second coming of Jesus Christ, who will then battle against the Antichrist, which they believe is to be like the poor or like non-whites or non-Christians and non-straight people. And of course, they believe that Jesus will whisk away the white people, just the white people, specifically white Aryan people. They will whisk the evangelical people into heaven and leave everyone down onto earth to be tortured in hellfire forever. Yeah, they legitimately believe that by letting Israel, a white supremacist and religious fascist settler colonial state, commit mass genocide across the Middle East and Northern Africa, that they can somehow summon through this mass blood ritual and human sacrifice a blonde hair, blue eye swastika on his forehead version of Jesus in order to escape into paradise for white Aryan people, while everyone else gets fucked over in hellfire. Maybe that's why they like John Foyt, but maybe not enough to elect him as a member of Congress. Hopefully never, but, we'll see. Time will only tell. And in their belief system, the Jewish people don't get off scot-free either in this, specifically because in this prophecy, they also claim that 2/3 of all Jews will also be sentenced to hellfire forever, and that the last third will be those who will renounce their Jewish identity and become white evangelicals too, and thus assimilating into white supremacy. So this prophecy not only involves the Israeli state committing mass genocide of brown and black people, but of themselves too. It's a cannibalistic movement like every other fascist movement is. A twofold genocide in the name of Christian crackerjackism. No wonder people are leaving Christianity in droves, because it is a white supremacist and vicious hyper-totalitarian psychopathic cult. And that's what it is, my friends. That's Christianity in a nutshell. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Evangelicals are aware of things like climate change, but they want it to happen. Maybe on the surface level they will deny it, but the thing is that they are aware of it to a point to where they want to accelerate it because they know that it will affect poor people to where they will become climate refugees, and that they're trying to kill off those people who are having to move because of climate change. They're also vividly aware of the countless atrocities their agenda causes, and they indulge in it. They're not stupid, they play dumb. But make no mistake, they absolutely want you to suffer. They want you to die, and they want you to be tortured forever. All the while, they get to enjoy the happiness forever at your expense, while you toil and be exploited by the capitalist system which they make themselves the ruling class of. They know what they are doing. They're here to torture you until we put an end to this. If Jesus, the brown Palestinian Jesus of history, saw what they are doing and what they have done in his name, he would be weeping tears of fucking blood. What I just said is something that I feel very emotional about. Because although I'm not a Christian myself, I can really feel that. Let me explain exactly what I mean. I'm going to show you a pastor from the state of Tennessee, and his name is Greg Locke. I'm going to give you some more context in a second, but first I want you to listen to this clip of him talking about the genocide in Gaza. Take a listen.
I hope Netanyahu's a leader and he just mows the whole thing down by this time next week. If you think all this open border stuff is not an opportunity for a bunch of Hamas sleeper cells to come into this nation right now and start killing innocent men, women, and children, you have lost your mind. I'm sick of all these Christians saying we ought to have peace with Islam. Islam is a satanic death cult, and they would cut your head off before I said amen in this sermon if they had a chance to. The Muslim religion hates Jewish people to the core of who they are.
What? I'm sorry. Coming from who? Coming from you, Greg Locke, who back in February of 2022 got your entire congregation in Mount Juliet, Tennessee to burn the book Mouse, which is a cautionary tale about the Holocaust, and he specifically wanted these books burned, not because of any satanic bullshit that was in it from Hamas or whatever, no, but because there were Polish Jews being depicted surviving the Holocaust within Mouse. He had actual book burnings, and the images of these book burnings are so eerily similar to the book burnings that Nazi Germany conducted when they burned down the Institute of Sexology. So this individual accelerates Israel as a nation state, yet he is willing to use a literal book burning to erase the history of the Holocaust. Why do you think that this person gives a shit about combating anti-Semitism unless anti-Semitism is illegally conflated with anti-Zionism? I would argue, and as a former Christian myself, that this conflation of this House resolution that conflates so-called anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, it actually is a free pass for Christian evangelical fucking nutjobs to go on these little fascist tirades in the first place. Because remember, the Christian Zionist movement is explicitly a Christian movement. Israel is propagated by mostly Christian lobbies, and it is specifically accelerated by mostly Christian nutjobs. So yeah, if Jesus saw these people doing what they're doing, behaving how they're behaving and killing the so many innocent lives through an apocalyptic death cult in the name of Jesus, yeah, he'd be crying in tears of blood. Okay, in conclusion, as much on us as there is on the Israeli state and Benjamin Netanyahu for the slaughter of Palestinians as well as the slaughter of Lebanese lives and so on and so forth, through its endless imperialist expansion, there is as equal of an onus on evangelicals for not only condoning and enabling this ongoing genocide, but gleefully and wholeheartedly orchestrating it for their own disgusting and repulsive doomsday agenda. Their hands are just as bloodstained as any IDF goon or Israeli settler colonist in the West Bank and Gaza. And if the cleansing comes full circle and the extinction of Palestinians and Israeli alike come to be, the world will not end. It will not cause Jesus to come back. It will only be among the darkest points of all of human history. The world will only look on in horror at what evangelical Christians have done and allowed, and the world will know who to point fingers to and blame when people in the far-off years of history look back in time at the time that we are alive right now, and they ask, how was all of this horrific bullshit allowed to happen? We will be able to point fingers and say, it was the goddamn Mick-ass Christian motherfuckers. So, to be anti-fascist means that you have to be anti-evangelical as well. And evangelicalism is white supremacy and fascism with a cross. I don't give a single fuck if you're an evangelical for Kamala Harris. Yes, it is a thing. Or if you're an evangelical for Biden. And yes, that is also a thing, but that was more of a thing in 2020. Your religion is itself theocratic white supremacy by design. And that's not just like my interpretation of it. It's like to its core, to its root, that's what it was, that's what it became, and that's what it still is, and that's what it's going to be until it is gone. And don't even bother trying to argue that there is a progressive faction of evangelicalism, or Christianity for that matter, and it hasn't done jack shit to make a positive impact against what the Doomsday cult has done. And all of this shit, from the Seven Mountains Mandate, to Ziklag, to the family, to the Christian identity movement, to the mass genocide happening in Palestine and now ongoing towards Lebanon, and who knows where it's going to expand to, if it's Syria or Iran, Egypt, so on and so forth. All of this is the logical conclusion of that sect of Christianity, and there is no redeeming it at all. It must burn, it must die. It is pure corruption at its finest form. It is pestilence. It is a plague of unhumanity. But here is my advice for my listeners who are listening to this horrible shit. We've been doing this for 3 hours now. Holy shit. And I know that you guys are probably, if you've listened this far, shaken to your fucking boots. Let me give you some advice. Don't be scared. Fight for tomorrow. Let me explain what I mean. The first thing you want to do is to build a network of friends and a network of coalitions, people whom you can trust. Secondly, I recommend making a database, specifically of churches that subscribe to the Seven Mountains Mandate ideology, and maybe do some research and some homework and try to learn as to whether or not they subscribe to these beliefs or have ties to these groups. I strongly advise protesting the church, because the thing is that churches, like the ones that Sean Foyt organizes with, they particularly use their political platform tax-free, but also to antagonize people on a day-to-day basis. So why can't we, under the First Amendment, we can actually start protesting churches in the area who are, accused of having sexual misconduct, like within the Catholic Church, but more specifically, those who either endorse Project 2025 or are members of the New Apostolic Reformation, members of the family, or even, heck, people who subscribe to the Seven Mountains Mandate. Knowing the names of these pastors and using your agitprop creatively, use your imagination here, to spread the message and to warn the community of a terroristic threat, yeah, that could do a whole lot to build solidarity and trust within your community to be able to routinely fight back against religious violence. I also just really want to put an emphasis on people who feel the need to push the next upcoming election to solve this problem. If your solution here is to vote for Kamala Harris, which I'm not going to tell you to not vote for Kamala Harris here, but if you're going to vote for Kamala Harris and then point to everything that I talked about in this podcast episode as a reason to vote for Kamala Harris, well then, my friends, you have more of an incentive now more than ever to hold Kamala Harris's feet to the fire and build unsurmountable pressure to get her to get a ceasefire deal and to put an end to the genocide itself. Otherwise, you are setting a precedent for future Republican leaders who might still have ties to this overall Christian identity movement to just take the plan of Project 2025 and amend it to fit the next conservative agenda of the presidency. Because I don't think that a lot of people who live in the United States truly understands that since the IDF trains American police officers that if this genocide is allowed to happen to Palestinian and Lebanese people and all of the other Arabic nations in that region, well then, that means genocide is allowed to happen here too. Of course, America was built literally on genocide, but we don't have to live that way. We don't have to live in genocidal times. That's the point. And by fighting the Democratic Party, instead of showing undying loyalty to it, especially when the only thing that it has to offer is that it's not called the Republican Party. Notice how I don't say it's not the Republican Party, because nearly all of their policies match the Republican Party's agenda. And all this is to say that you do need to do much more than organize for the election. It has always been the time, but it is now time more than ever to continue to build class solidarity with our community. Now more than ever. And while Christian identity is a doomsday cult that promises supremacy for only a selected few people, we don't have to live that future. And that's worth fighting for. Fighting for a future that doesn't have Christian goddamn mick-ass pieces of shit running around and causing chaos. There is a future worth fighting for, even if it seems hopeless. And I really want people to come away with that from listening to this episode. I really hope that you didn't just sit down and listen to this in one go, because holy shit, this was so long. But please, we need to fight for a better future. Because we know that this is bad, that this is evil, that this is pure evil right in front of our faces. But that's where our compassion and empathy comes from. That's what makes us human. And that, my friends, is worth fighting for. Our humanity. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to SaboCast for more episodes that are coming up very soon, as I have more episodes coming up that involve anti-Zionist Judaism. I am interviewing multiple people whom I think have done a great job educating not just me, but will educate you on how Israel is literally a contradiction to the Jewish faith. I've been working on this episode for a long time that you just listened to. Of course, it is goddamn 3 hours long. I don't know how long the other one's going to be. It could be just as long. I hope it is a little shorter at least, but hey, that means there's plenty of good ass content for my good ass audience to good ass listen to. I really hope that me being sick partially through this episode didn't bleed too much into all of this. because holy shit, I really was like overcome with a cold. Also, this episode was originally supposed to be released on September 1st, so it's about a month late, and I'm very sorry, but this was one of those episodes where the rabbit hole really did just get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. There really was just like a whole lot to go through. I'm sorry that it's this long. I'm sorry for both of you, and I'm also sorry for me. But you know what? I fucking had to do it. Like, if I didn't do this thorough of a coverage of this topic, I don't think I would have been able to live with myself. Now, I'm gonna go hide under a blanket and just go to sleep. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a great day or night or week or holiday or anything else. Take care, folks. Until next time.